You've been told to be strong by holding it all in, to keep smiling when everything inside feels like it's breaking, to push through, stay quiet, and pretend nothing hurts. But if that worked, why do so many people feel like they're crumbling behind closed doors? Why does life still feel heavy, even when everything looks fine on the outside? The truth is, strength isn't pretending to be okay. It's learning how to feel, how to let go, how to stand in the middle of chaos and still be at peace. And Buddhism holds the map. For thousands of years, Buddhist masters have taught a different kind of power. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs to win, but the quiet strength that doesn't flinch when the world gets cruel, the kind that bends without breaking, that smiles with nothing to prove, that walks away from noise and still feels whole. Tonight, as these lessons sink into your mind, something will shift. The pressure to control everything will loosen. The tension in your chest will soften, and slowly the storm inside will begin to settle. You'll feel lighter, calmer, stronger, like finally taking a deep breath after holding it in for too long. And when you wake up tomorrow, you won't just feel rested, you'll feel ready. Ready to face life with a strength that doesn't come from fighting, but from deeply understanding. This isn't just a sleep audio. This is a rebuilding of your mind, of your peace, of your strength. Are you ready? Let's begin. And now that your heart's starting to settle, that deep breath starting to return, let's begin with the first truth. One that flips everything we've been taught about strength on its head. Because what if real power wasn't about force? What if the softest part of you was actually the strongest? People hear the word gentle and instantly think of weakness, like it means letting people walk all over you, like it means giving up. But they've misunderstood the whole point. Gentleness isn't surrender, it's strategy. It's strength refined so deeply that it doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. And in Buddhism, gentleness is not only a virtue, it's an unbreakable shield. Kindness isn't just about being nice. It's a response born from clarity. A choice made not out of fear, but out of deep control. When cruelty shows up in front of a Buddhist monk, their calm isn't submission, it's resistance in its most powerful form. Because reacting with anger is easy. Anyone can snap, anyone can scream, but staying rooted when someone is trying to pull you down, that's discipline, that's training, that's strength. A gentle response isn't born overnight. It comes from seeing the truth of things. Knowing that people hurt others because they're hurt themselves. Knowing that anger thrown at you is often pain misplaced. And instead of throwing it back, Buddhism teaches how to absorb it, transform it, and let it dissolve. That's not weakness, that's alchemy. Turning poison into peace. Cruelty doesn't disappear when you become gentle. The world doesn't get softer, but your response becomes sharper, cleaner, wiser, and that changes everything. Buddhist texts often use water as a symbol. It bends, flows, moves around obstacles, but try cutting it with a sword. Nothing happens. Water yields, but it's untouchable. That's gentleness. That's the soft shield. The ability to move with life without letting life harden you. So how is this built? Where does this kind of gentleness come from? It starts with mindfulness. Noticing your reactions. watching your triggers rise without immediately acting on them. Someone insults you, and instead of fighting back, you pause. You feel the heat, but you don't pour gasoline on it. You let it burn itself out, and suddenly you're not controlled by anyone. You're free. That pause, that's the shield forming. That gap between stimulus and response is where Buddhism plants its seeds. Because in that space, you get to choose. Do you repeat the same angry patterns that keep hurting you? Or do you respond from something deeper, something still, something strong? Every time you choose stillness over reaction, the shield gets stronger. And one day, things that once ruined your day will barely move your peace. Compassion is also part of the shield, not the soft, fluffy kind that says, "It's okay" to everything, but the razor-sharp kind that sees clearly. That says, "I understand where your pain is coming from, but I don't have to take it on." Buddhist compassion includes boundaries. It's not about fixing everyone or sacrificing yourself. It's about seeing suffering and not adding to it. Sometimes that means saying no. Sometimes it means walking away without anger. That's real power, when you can walk away from fire without carrying the smoke with you. And here's where it gets deep. Buddhist gentleness trains the nervous system. When you meet aggression with calm, your body learns safety. Your mind stops reacting like it's in a war zone. Over time, you don't just act peaceful, you feel peaceful, even in chaos, even in heartbreak, even in rejection, because you've trained your system not to collapse every time life gets loud. Think about it. How many times have people tried to push your buttons just to see if they could get a rise out of you? And how often have they succeeded? That's not strength. That's vulnerability in disguise. But when those same people realize they can't shake you, when their insults bounce off and disappear into your silence, that's when the real transformation begins. And it's not just about what they see, it's about what you feel, because not reacting saves energy, it saves clarity, and it leaves you standing when everyone else is exhausted from the fight. The Buddha didn't teach people to be tough, he taught them to be free. And freedom doesn't come from dominating others, it comes from mastering yourself. That's why Buddhist strength is quiet. It's not on display. It doesn't beg for approval. It doesn't need applause. It's strong in its stillness. And when tested, it doesn't crack. It absorbs. It watches. It learns. Then it responds, not with force, but with precision. Even when people attack with words, the Buddhist path teaches, don't take it in. One sutta tells the story of someone insulting the Buddha to his face, and instead of reacting, the Buddha asks, if someone offers you a gift and you don't take it, to whom does it belong? The answer is clear. Insults are gifts you don't have to accept. When you leave them untouched, they return to the sender. That's not weakness. That's elegance. That's grace. That's the soft shield in action. And this doesn't mean you let injustice win. It means you don't let injustice turn you into the thing you're standing against. You fight it differently, not with anger, but with clarity, not with hate, but with steady courage. Buddhism never says stay silent when people suffer, but it teaches that your fight must come from wisdom, not woundedness. That's how your shield doesn't just protect you, it protects others too. The deeper teaching here is about energy. Anger is draining. Retaliation is heavy. Carrying resentment is like wearing armor made of stone. But gentleness is light. It doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't keep score, and yet it endures. Gentleness has stamina. It keeps you moving when others are stuck in their battles. It lets you flow forward while they're still fighting ghosts in their minds. And here's the paradox. The more gentle you become, the more people respect you. Not because you demand it, but because they can feel your centeredness. It's magnetic. They know they can't manipulate you. They know their chaos can't reach you. And that kind of presence? It changes rooms. It shifts conversations. It transforms relationships without ever needing to raise your voice. One of the most powerful Zen sayings is, "The bamboo bends in the wind, but does not break." That's the whole path. You don't resist life. You adapt. You stay rooted but flexible. And in doing so, you become unbreakable. Because true strength isn't about being rigid. It's about knowing when to stand still and when to move, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to hold on and when to let go. People think of gentleness as passive, but Buddhist gentleness is deeply active. It watches every moment. It listens carefully. It moves with wisdom. It chooses its words. It decides not to let the world write its story. That's power. The power to choose your peace every single time. There's also something sacred about the quiet power of metta, loving kindness. Not for show, not as a spiritual mask, but as a lived reality. Wishing well to those who've hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because carrying hate only poisons your own mind. That's one of the most brutal and freeing teachings of Buddhism. Let go, not because they're right, but because you deserve peace. That's gentleness. That's maturity. That's strength so deep it doesn't need revenge. It needs rest. And when you live like this, something strange starts to happen. You stop fearing conflict. You stop avoiding discomfort. Because you know it can't touch you unless you let it. And that freedom, that's rare. Most people are still reacting to things from years ago, still reliving fights in their heads, still picking at old wounds. But when you master gentleness, those wounds close. The story changes. The world softens because you've softened, without ever becoming weak. That's the soft shield. It's invisible, but it's real. It doesn't come from a book. It comes from daily practice, sitting with your breath, noticing your thoughts, watching your emotions rise like waves, and then fall without dragging you under. Every time you breathe through it instead of reacting to it, you strengthen that shield. And one day, you'll wake up in the middle of chaos and feel calm. Not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. So don't let anyone tell you gentleness is weakness. Don't let the world convince you that you need to shout to be heard. Don't trade your peace for the illusion of power. Buddhist strength doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness, with knowing who you are, with meeting life, not with clenched fists, but with open hands, ready to receive whatever comes and let go of whatever must go. That's the shield, and it's already inside you. Now, we just train it, one breath at a time, and once the soft shield begins to hold, once the heart learns to stay calm in storms without hardening, another layer begins to surface. Something deeper, something older, a force not outside, but inside. A whisper that questions everything, a voice that doesn't scream but doubts, that pulls you toward comfort when you need to grow and stirs fear just when you start to rise. That's the next training ground. That's Mara. People think of Mara as a monster, a demon, an evil spirit that tried to stop the Buddha from reaching enlightenment. But the real power of that story is symbolic. Mara isn't some external beast hiding in the shadows. Mara is internal resistance. Mara is that subtle force inside your mind that says, "You're not ready. You'll never change. What's the point?" It's the craving that wants to numb the pain, the fear that begs you to shrink, the illusion that tells you your worth comes from outside. This is where the real strength begins to form, not in silence or stillness, but in staring Mara in the face and not flinching, not running, not distracting, but seeing clearly. Because that's the trap. Mara isn't strong. He only wins when he's unseen, when he's disguised as logic, when his voice sounds like your own. The second you expose him, the illusion weakens. The mind begins to clear. When the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, Mara didn't come with fire or weapons. He came with pleasure, doubt, and fear. He offered desires to distract, questions to confuse, threats to scare. And what did the Buddha do? He didn't fight. He didn't run. He just sat, completely still, and said, "I see you, Mara." That sentence is everything. It's the ultimate turning point, not just in the myth, but in your life too. Because every day, Mara shows up. Every time there's an urge to delay what matters. Every time fear whispers, "Don't try." Every time the past repeats in your mind like an old song on loop, trying to drag you back. That's Mara. And Buddhism doesn't say, destroy him. It says, see him, know his tricks, understand how he moves. And by doing that, you stop being his puppet. One of Mara's strongest tools is desire. Not the healthy kind that motivates, but the kind that blinds, that convinces you happiness is one more purchase away, one more relationship, one more validation. The kind of wanting that keeps the heart always reaching but never resting. Buddhism calls it tanha, thirst. And like salt water, the more you drink, the thirstier you get. The trap of tanha isn't in wanting, it's in thinking the object will fix the feeling. You want love to stop feeling lonely, success to stop feeling small, status to stop feeling invisible, but none of it sticks. Because what's being chased isn't the object, it's relief. And relief, real relief, doesn't come from outside. It comes from seeing the desire, sitting with it, and realizing it passes. And that's the clarity Mara doesn't want you to have. Because once you sit long enough with a craving without feeding it, you see through it. It starts to fade. The body shakes less. The mind gets quieter. The monster starts to shrink. And now you're not controlled. Now you're choosing. That's power. But it's not just desire. Mara also brings fear, and this kind of fear is sneaky. It shows up not to protect you, but to limit you. It wraps itself in logic. What if you fail? What will people say? You're too late. But fear that repeats is often not truth, it's habit. It's the nervous system replaying old stories, trying to keep you in familiar pain because it's easier than unfamiliar growth. So how do you train clarity in the middle of fear? You stop running. You breathe into it. You watch how the body reacts. You watch how the story builds in your head. And then you question it. You ask, is this real? Is this now? Is this helpful? And just like that, the fog starts to thin. That's what Buddhist practice sharpens, the ability to question the voice in your head without being controlled by it. This isn't the same as toxic positivity. Buddhism doesn't say, ignore your pain. It says, explore it. Be curious. Be direct. If a doubt keeps returning, don't push it away. Ask where it comes from. Doubts are like messengers. Sometimes they show up just to help you see where your confidence was borrowed instead of built. Sometimes they're here to show you a belief that needs updating. Either way, doubt becomes useful. And once something becomes useful, it stops being a threat. Mara also disguises himself as guilt and shame, regrets from the past that repeat endlessly, memories you wish you could undo, words you wish you hadn't said. But guilt, when held too long, becomes self-punishment. And shame? Shame tells the lie that mistakes define your worth, that you are your worst moment. Buddhism cuts through this with one of the simplest and most radical truths. The self is not fixed. You are not one thing. You are not your past. You are not your labels. And because of that, you can change. You can evolve. You can release the weight you've carried, not because you deserve to suffer, but because suffering isn't required for growth. Clarity is. And clarity doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it shows you the people you've outgrown, the habits that are killing your peace, the distractions you've been using to avoid your pain. But that clarity, that's the mirror. That's Mara doing his job, not to destroy you, but to test you, to see if you're ready to stop numbing and start living with your eyes wide open. Every time you meet Mara with awareness, your inner strength grows, because now you're not flinching from truth. You're using it, turning temptation into insight, turning fear into presence, turning doubt into wisdom. That's why in some Buddhist traditions, Mara isn't banished, he's invited. Because each time he comes, you get sharper. Each test becomes another step toward sovereignty, the kind of inner freedom no one can take. And let's be honest, most of us were trained to avoid discomfort, to hide our mess, to pretend. But Buddhism is the opposite. It teaches radical honesty, not to shame yourself, but to meet yourself fully, without judgment, without panic. And in doing that, something opens. The need to chase fades. The fear of being seen softens. And you realize you can sit with anything. That's the hidden strength in this path. Not the ability to feel good all the time, but the ability to stay grounded even when you don't. To walk straight through discomfort and not lose your center. To let Mara knock and open the door with calm eyes. That changes everything. Even the stories from ancient texts aren't just about history. They're metaphors for your inner world. The storms that show up in meditation, the distractions that pull you away from growth, the emotions that rise like waves when you're quiet enough to feel them. That's where the training happens, in the stillness, in the silence, when nothing's distracting you from yourself anymore. And the thing is, Mara doesn't just show up in crisis. He shows up when you're about to rise, right before you make a decision to grow, right before you commit to peace. That's when resistance hits hardest. Not because you're weak, but because you're close. And Mara's job is to make sure you're serious. So the next time that inner voice starts doubting, ask, is this truth or resistance? Is this fear or feedback? Because clarity means seeing the difference. And once you do, the doubt starts to dissolve. The fear loses its grip. The temptation passes through like wind, not walls. And in its place, stillness returns, clean, steady, untouchable. That's the paradox Mara never wants you to realize. He shows up loud, but he has no power unless you feed him. And when you stop feeding him, when you stop reacting, he has no choice but to leave. Not because you destroyed him, but because you no longer need him. He served his purpose. He showed you where your strength was hiding. So, don't fear Mara. Study him. Learn how he moves. See where he hides, because every time he appears, it's a mirror. And the more you look into that mirror without flinching, the clearer your path becomes. This is where sovereignty begins, not in control, but in awareness, not in having all the answers, but in asking better questions, not in fighting fear, but in walking beside it until it tires out and fades. This is where the noise ends, and the path begins. And once Mara is seen clearly, once his tricks start to fade and his illusions lose their grip, another kind of challenge begins to reveal itself. A quieter one, less dramatic, but even more dangerous. It's the part that doesn't show up as fear, but as flattery. Not as shame, but as approval. And if the mind isn't trained, it starts dancing for praise and hiding from blame, forgetting who it really is underneath all the noise. This is where the next battle is fought, not with demons, but with desire for validation. There's a kind of shame that most people never talk about. Not the shame of doing something wrong, but the shame of being disliked. The discomfort of being misunderstood. The ache that shows up when applause doesn't come. And on the flip side, the rush of pride when someone approves, when someone compliments, when someone notices. That little high, that little hit, and then the craving for more. This is where Buddhism offers one of its most radical teachings, that freedom isn't just about escaping suffering, it's about escaping dependence on praise, on blame, on reputation, on being seen as good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse. The Buddha called these the 8 worldly winds: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. And the teaching is simple. If your peace rises and falls with any of them, you're still in chains. The goal isn't to stop feeling. It's to stop being moved like a puppet every time someone claps or criticizes. Because if your sense of worth comes from what others say, it can be taken from you in a single sentence. That's not stability. That's slavery to opinion. And Buddhism says, step out. But how? How do you stop caring when it feels so personal? The answer is in what's called noble shame, a kind of inner compass that doesn't need the outside world to tell it what's right or wrong. It's the opposite of social shame, which comes from fearing what others think. Noble shame is private. It comes from knowing what aligns with your truth and refusing to betray that, no matter what the crowd says. This is where real power begins to grow. Because once you stop chasing approval, your actions become cleaner. You're not trying to look kind. You are kind. even when no one sees it. You're not trying to look wise. You stay silent even when speaking could make you look smart. You don't jump at every chance to defend yourself because your peace isn't on trial. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become rooted. A tree doesn't move just because the wind changes direction, and people's opinions are wind, always shifting, always unstable. One day they'll praise you, the next they'll forget you, or blame you, or misunderstand you. If your identity is built on their words, it collapses the moment they stop clapping. That's why detachment is strength, not numbness, not indifference, but clarity. The clarity to know who you are when no one's looking. The clarity to keep doing what's right, even when it's unrecognized. The clarity to let go of the need to be impressive. And here's the deep part. Praise can be more dangerous than blame, because blame makes you question yourself, which can lead to growth. But praise can inflate the ego without you even realizing it. It can turn good intentions into performances. It can make you addicted to being liked, even at the cost of your peace. Buddhism trains the mind to see this, to notice how praise makes the body lean forward, makes the voice get louder, makes the smile stretch just a little too wide. It teaches you to feel that reaction and then pause. Not to reject the compliment, but to see it for what it is, a sound, a wind, temporary, and not yours to carry. Criticism, too, becomes neutral. You start to see how blame is often more about the speaker than the subject. Someone lashes out, and instead of absorbing it, you ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this mine? And if not, you let it go. Just like the Buddha said to insults, if you don't take the gift, it stays with the giver. This way of living doesn't make you disconnected. It makes you untouchable, not in a distant, aloof way, but in a peaceful, steady way, where your sense of self doesn't swing with the opinions of others, where you're not chasing approval and hiding from criticism like a child begging for attention. You grow out of that cycle, and your life becomes simpler. Monks train this from the first day. When they shave their heads, it's not just about humility, it's about letting go of identity built on looks. When they wear the same robes every day, it's not to impress, it's to erase the need to impress. When they go barefoot with a bowl, it's not because they lack, it's because they want to unlearn the idea that status equals worth. This is where the discipline begins. Every time someone compliments you and you don't let it inflate you, you gain freedom. Every time someone criticizes you and you don't collapse, you gain strength. The mind becomes less reactive. The heart becomes less needy. And suddenly, you're not walking around hoping to be liked. You're walking with purpose, rooted in what matters. That's why noble shame matters. It keeps you honest. It's the voice that says, stay true, not because someone is watching, but because you are. And that's the difference between a life built on show and a life built on depth. And here's the twist. When you stop needing praise, people trust you more. They feel your calm. They feel your presence because you're not performing. You're not chasing approval with every word. You're just being. And that's rare. That's magnetic. That's real. Even in speech, Buddhism teaches to avoid exaggeration, not because it's wrong to express yourself, but because inflating truth is a sign of seeking reaction. If you always need your words to land with impact, you're still dancing for applause. But when you speak simply, clearly, without trying to impress, that's when truth cuts through. That's when people listen, not because you shout, but because you're quiet. There's a sutta where a monk is praised by a king and the monk responds with silence. Later, he's blamed by a rival, and again, silence. Someone asks him why, and he says, "Praise and blame are like echoes in a canyon. They are not me." That's the teaching, to hear the echo, but not become it. And yet, this isn't a rejection of connection, it's a refinement. Because the more detached you become from external noise, the more honest your connections become. You're no longer pleasing people to avoid discomfort. You're no longer twisting your truth to win approval. You're present, real, unshakable. There's also a reason why monks meditate on death, not to be morbid, but to remember that opinions die with time, that all the people who ever judged you will one day vanish, and the only thing left will be your own mind. That's the ultimate reminder. You're not living for likes. You're living for clarity. So if someone praises you, smile, but don't hold it. If someone blames you, breathe. But don't carry it. Let it pass through. Let the winds blow without losing your balance, because the more you need praise, the easier it is to be manipulated. But when your joy no longer depends on applause, you become free. This freedom is silent. It's not flashy. No one claps for detachment. But inside, you'll feel the shift, the calm, the space. And that's when you know you're living from truth, not reaction. This is the noble shame, the internal compass, the refusal to abandon your center just to fit in. And once it's lit, it never goes out. And once the need for validation quiets, once the heart stops being pulled by praise or crushed by blame, what's left is something rare. Silence. Space. A kind of internal emptiness that most people fear, but that in Buddhism becomes the birthplace of strength. Because once there's nothing left to chase or defend, discipline begins. Not the harsh kind, not forced, but clean, quiet, grounded. And this is where the monk's begging bowl comes in, not as a symbol of poverty, but as a symbol of power, because only the empty bowl can be filled, and only the empty mind can truly choose. The bowl the monk carries isn't just for food. It's a tool for training the mind, to hold nothing, to expect nothing, and to receive everything with presence. The world moves fast. There's noise from every angle, tasks, opinions, goals, cravings. The mind gets stuffed like an overflowing cabinet, full of what it doesn't need. And when the time comes to find clarity, there's no room left. No space to think, no space to see. But the monk's bowl teaches a different rhythm. One of waiting, one of accepting, one of choosing simplicity, not because there's no other option, but because there is, and you walk away from it. That's where discipline begins. Not in strict rules or punishment, but in space. When you make space, you see your habits clearly. You notice the urge to fill every moment with stimulation. You notice the craving to keep scrolling, keep talking, keep planning. But in Buddhism, silence is not emptiness. It's awareness. It's the place where real transformation happens. And that's why the bowl is kept empty, because its power isn't in what it holds, but in what it's ready for. This isn't just metaphor, it's mental training. Every time you create space instead of filling it, you're practicing discipline. Saying no to excess food, excess talk, excess planning. It's not about deprivation, it's about precision, knowing what you need and letting go of the rest. That's the sharp edge of the practice, not adding more, but removing what's in the way. The empty bowl also breaks the illusion of control. When the monk walks through the village, they don't demand. They wait. They receive. And in doing that, they let go of the idea that life must always bend to their will. That's a deep strength most people never touch, because the modern mind wants to control everything, outcomes, people, reputation. But control breeds anxiety. Emptiness breeds trust. Trust that life will give what is needed, not what is wanted. Trust that nothing added is better than something forced. And trust that stillness can hold more truth than endless noise. This is the discipline that builds resilience. Because when you stop needing the next thing to feel full, you're no longer vulnerable to what's taken away. In chaos, the one who needs less is always stronger, not because they've given up, but because they've stripped away what weakens. The empty bowl doesn't resist the world. It moves through it lightly. It's carried without heaviness. That's the training. You don't need to force your life into shape. You need to stop filling every crack with distraction. Then the shape reveals itself. Mental clarity is born here. Because once you stop pouring every thought into action, once you let your mind rest, it starts to show you what matters. The noise clears, the fog lifts. You begin to notice what's really going on, not just in the world, but inside. The patterns, the cycles, the habits that sneak in and repeat when you're not watching. The empty bowl is what catches those without judging them, without grabbing them. It just holds space. This kind of discipline isn't about suffering. It's about sharpening. Sharpening the mind to feel more, not less. Sharpening awareness to catch thoughts before they spiral. Sharpening speech to say less, but mean more. In Buddhism, restraint isn't about fear, it's about strength. The strength to stop before habit takes over. The strength to breathe instead of react. The strength to stay light in a world that wants to weigh you down with everything. And the bowl keeps teaching. It reminds the monk every day to return to basics. No matter what wisdom is gained, no matter what insights arise, the bowl must still be cleaned, carried, and emptied. That's humility. That's the daily reminder. Nothing is owed, nothing is permanent, and the mind must remain open to receive the present moment as it is, not as it was planned to be. This is why Buddhist temples are often so simple. The walls are bare, the robes are plain, the rituals are quiet, because it's not about what you add, it's about what you clear away. Complexity is not depth, simplicity is. And in simplicity, the mind becomes disciplined not through pressure, but through space. That's the core teaching. Don't just do less, need less, want less, attach less. And in that detachment, you find a peace no possession can buy. Even in speech, the empty bowl shows up. Speaking less doesn't mean thinking less. It means thinking deeper, watching your words, pausing before you respond, letting silence do its work. That's where power begins to grow, because a person who can sit in silence without needing to fill it is a person who cannot be manipulated, cannot be rushed, cannot be pushed into reacting. And that kind of presence is discipline, because it doesn't come naturally. It comes from practice. The body trains this too. Buddhist monks eat 1 or 2 small meals a day, not because of a rule, but because they've studied what the body really needs. And in that study, they've found clarity, because too much food fogs the mind. Too much stimulation numbs the senses. And when the body is overloaded, the mind has to work twice as hard to stay clear. So they keep it light, they keep it lean, and in that simplicity, energy returns. The same goes for possessions. The bowl holds what is needed, not what is desired. And so the monk doesn't carry bags of belongings. There's no need. Every item is intentional. Every tool is used. And this teaches the mind to let go of attachment to things that only clutter the space where presence should be. That's discipline, not just choosing what to carry, but what not to. And then there's time. The empty bowl teaches time too. Because when you stop filling your life with unnecessary tasks and distractions, time stretches. The day slows. You begin to see where your attention is leaking, where your energy is being wasted, and you pull it back. That's how the disciplined life isn't exhausting. It's efficient. It's focused. It knows what to do and when to stop. The world around you won't understand this at first. They'll see emptiness as lack, stillness as laziness. But over time, they'll feel the shift. You'll walk differently, speak differently. Your presence will feel grounded, uncluttered, awake. And people will start to notice, not because you're loud, but because your energy is clean. That's what the bowl does. It purifies your actions, your intentions, your mind. And when hardship comes, and it always does, the empty bowl holds space for it. There's no panic, no scrambling to fix, just presence, just breath, just room. And that room is where peace can land, even when life hurts, even when things fall apart. Because the one who has space doesn't break. They bend, they breathe, they wait, and then they choose their next step, not in reaction, but in wisdom. This is the kind of discipline that outlasts chaos, the kind that doesn't crack under pressure because it never built its life on clutter. The bowl stays empty, and because it's empty, it's ready, always ready for whatever the next moment brings. That's the freedom Buddhism trains, not the freedom to have everything, but the freedom to need nothing. And in that space, in that quiet, something starts to grow, a kind of deep joy, not the loud kind, not the kind that comes and goes with events, but the kind that rises from living clean, living simple, living clear. And that joy, that's the gift the bowl was waiting for all along. And once the bowl is empty, once the mind begins to quiet and the hands stop grasping for more, there's something unexpected that rises in the stillness. Not fear, not lack, not weakness, but a different kind of strength, the kind no one teaches, the kind that doesn't come from pushing harder or holding on tighter. It comes from letting go, not as a retreat, but as a release, not from defeat, but from deep wisdom. This is where Buddhist courage lives, in surrender. The word surrender scares people. It sounds like giving up. It sounds like losing. But in Buddhism, surrender isn't passive. It's one of the most powerful decisions you can make. Because it takes strength to stop forcing. It takes strength to release control over what cannot be controlled. The more you fight what is, the more you suffer. And Buddhism teaches not to fight life, but to flow with it. Not to give in, but to give up the illusion that you were ever fully in charge. That illusion is heavy. The belief that every outcome must be managed, every detail must be perfect, every person must behave the way you expect. It's exhausting, and it doesn't work. Control is a moving target. Life shifts, people change, plans break. But when the mind clings to certainty, it breaks with them. That's where letting go becomes the doorway to peace. Letting go is not escape. It's clarity. It's saying, this is what I can do, and this is what I can't. It's releasing what was never yours to carry. Expectations, regrets, the pressure to fix everything, the need to always be right, to always be strong, to always be calm. Surrender means softening without collapsing. It means staying open even when things fall apart. This isn't a theory, it's a practice. When frustration rises, surrender means not tightening your jaw, not storming off, not pretending it doesn't hurt. It means staying, breathing, letting the emotion pass without trying to control it or bury it. That's not weakness. That's strength so steady it doesn't need to dominate. It just allows. And through that allowing, it endures. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from craving and clinging, from wanting things to be different than they are. And the moment you let go of that grasp, something shifts. Not because the situation changes, but because your grip on it loosens. And in that looseness, peace enters. People often confuse surrender with giving up hope, but it's the opposite. Surrender is giving up the fight with reality. Hope is still alive, but it's not forced. It breathes naturally. It adjusts. It sees clearly. When you let go of how you thought life should look, you make room for how it actually is. And in that room, unexpected beauty shows up. You start noticing things again, the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones you missed while you were too busy trying to make everything perfect. And sometimes, surrender is the only path through pain. There are losses that can't be fixed, endings that can't be reversed, people who won't come back. Trying to hold on only prolongs the suffering. Buddhism doesn't ask you to forget. It asks you to accept, to grieve fully, to feel deeply, and then to let the moment go when it's ready to leave. That's where resilience is born, not in resisting the storm, but in standing through it without collapsing. This kind of strength is quiet. No one applauds you for it. No one sees the courage it takes to wake up every day with a heart that's been broken and still let it open again. No one sees the restraint it takes to stop yourself from fixing what isn't yours to fix. But inside, you feel it. That calm, that space, that clarity. That's the reward of surrender. Not applause, but peace. Even in relationships, surrender changes everything. When you stop needing others to behave a certain way to feel okay, you become free. You can love without control. You can support without attachment. You can listen without needing to fix. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without chaining your happiness to someone else's actions. That's love with boundaries, compassion without collapse. Surrender also deepens presence, because control always lives in the future, trying to shape what hasn't happened yet. But surrender lives now. It says, this moment is enough. I don't have to escape it. I don't have to manage it. I just have to meet it. That's why meditators are trained to observe the breath without changing it. Not because the breath is magical, but because it's real. It's now. And learning to be with what is, without manipulation, trains the mind to surrender in daily life too. And this surrender ripples outward. It touches your work, your goals, your plans. You still act, you still dream, but you stop tying your identity to the outcome. You do what needs to be done, and then you release the result. That's the teaching of karma. Not that you control everything, but that you influence reality through action, without obsession over how it plays out. When the Buddha reached enlightenment, he didn't gain superpowers. He didn't start controlling the world. He simply stopped resisting it. He saw that everything is impermanent, that craving creates suffering, that letting go brings peace, and that surrender, true surrender, isn't a fallback. It's a doorway into clarity, compassion, and freedom. This isn't about being passive. It's about being wise. When it's time to act, you act. When it's time to speak, you speak. But you don't force. You don't chase. You don't grip life like it owes you something. You flow with it. And in that flow, your power is revealed. A kind of power that doesn't burn out. Because it's not trying to hold the whole world together. It's just holding space for it to unfold. This discipline shows up in the smallest moments. The plan that changes last minute. The friend that lets you down. The goal that slips away. Each time you get to practice. Do you tense and panic? Or do you pause, feel, and release? Every moment is a chance to soften your grip, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. The nervous system calms, the mind sharpens, the heart opens again, not because everything is easy, but because you've stopped demanding that it should be. And in surrender, trust is born. Not blind faith, but a steady knowing that whatever comes, you can meet it. That life may not follow your script, but you're not lost without it. That even in uncertainty, you are anchored. That's what Buddhist surrender gives, not guarantees, but grounding. This is also why rituals matter in monastic life, not because they control outcomes, but because they give structure to surrender. Bowing, breathing, walking, all done with presence, not to manipulate, but to return to stillness. Ritual is a reminder. Let the day unfold without rushing it. Let the moment teach you instead of forcing it to fit your expectations. And even in suffering, surrender has a role. Not to give up, but to stop resisting the fact that pain is here. Buddhism doesn't ask you to like pain, but it invites you to meet it directly, to sit with it, to see it clearly, and then to let it pass when it's ready. That's how pain becomes teacher, not tormentor. That's how wounds become wisdom. This approach rewires your entire life. Goals become clearer, relationships become softer. The inner critic loses its grip, because now you're not living to control, you're living to respond, with presence, with honesty, with flow. And from that flow, action still arises. But it's no longer desperate. It's no longer coming from fear. It's calm, precise, clean, and the world starts to feel different. Not because it changed, but because your grip did. You stop fighting time. You stop fighting loss. You stop fighting the parts of yourself that are still healing. You start allowing everything to be as it is, and from that, transformation begins. That's the paradox Buddhist practice reveals again and again. The more you let go, the more grounded you feel. The less you try to control others, the more free you become. The less you try to force happiness, the more often it arrives. Because peace doesn't come from holding on. It comes from releasing what was never yours to carry in the first place. And that's the kind of strength most people never discover. Because it doesn't look strong on the outside, it doesn't perform. But inside, it's steady, it's calm, it's clear. And when life throws its next challenge, because it always will, you won't have to brace. You'll breathe, you'll open, you'll respond. This is surrender. This is strength. And once the grip is released, once the weight of control is finally set down, what starts to rise is not weakness, not emptiness, but a quiet kind of beauty. Something delicate yet steady, something soft yet indestructible. The kind of strength that doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from blooming directly out of it. Buddhism doesn't just teach how to endure suffering, it teaches how to grow through it. Not in spite of it, but because of it. And nothing expresses this better than the lotus. The lotus flower has become one of the deepest symbols in Buddhism for a reason. It grows out of mud, thick, sticky, dark mud. The roots twist through filth and sediment, unseen by the world above. And yet what rises through the water is clean, whole, beautiful, unstained by what it came from. That's not just a poetic image, it's the path of practice. It's the truth of transformation, that what tries to bury you can become what grows you. Pain doesn't ruin people. Denial does. Avoidance does. Pretending everything is fine while the heart is silently breaking, that's what withers us. But when pain is faced head-on, when suffering is no longer hidden or resented, something begins to shift. Not quickly, not dramatically, but deeply. The roots begin to reach downward with honesty, and the petals begin to reach upward with courage. Buddhism doesn't avoid the mud, it points straight at it. It says, look here, not to shame you, but to free you. Because buried in every difficult emotion is the seed of awakening. Anger shows where you've been hurt. Grief shows what mattered. Fear shows where attachment hides. Instead of pushing these emotions away, Buddhist practice teaches to sit with them, observe them, understand them. That's how the lotus grows, by rooting itself in what most people try to escape. The mistake is thinking beauty comes from avoiding the dark. But the strongest kind of beauty doesn't come from being untouched. It comes from being touched by everything and still staying whole. The lotus isn't pure because it floated above the mud. It's pure because it rose through it without losing its nature. That's what real strength looks like. Not polished, not perfect, but real. When suffering hits, the mind wants to either numb it or dramatize it. We either try to run from the feeling, distract ourselves, bury it in work, food, noise, or we let it define us, turn it into identity, wear it like a badge. Buddhism offers a third way. Feel the suffering fully, but don't cling to it. Acknowledge the mud, but don't sink in it. Let it nourish the roots, but keep growing. This means creating space for your suffering, not shrinking from it and not drowning in it, just holding it like a bowl, with awareness, with breath. This is where meditation becomes a tool of transformation, not to get rid of the pain, but to give it room to speak. And in that listening, clarity begins. You start to see the layers, the story, the beliefs wrapped around the pain, and slowly they begin to fall away. It also means letting go of the idea that healing should be fast or linear. The lotus doesn't rush. It doesn't force itself to bloom. It trusts the process, one breath at a time, 1 inch at a time. And that's how the most unshakable inner strength is built, not in leaps, but in the quiet decision to keep rising, even when it's hard. Some people think strength is the ability to stay untouched, but Buddhist strength is the ability to feel everything and still not be destroyed by it. To be fully human, raw, sensitive, open, and still walk forward, still care, still love, still rise. And there's something else the lotus teaches. Nothing has to look perfect for it to be sacred. The mud isn't a mistake. The wounds aren't flaws. They're part of the growth. They're part of the path. Buddhism doesn't promise to erase your suffering. It offers something more powerful, the tools to turn it into wisdom, into presence, into beauty that isn't shallow or performative, but earned through truth. Even tears become part of the water that holds the stem. Even heartbreak becomes the force that cracks open the seed. And when you stop resenting the dark, you begin to see it differently, as compost, as fuel, as the exact material needed for your awakening. But this kind of growth doesn't happen in isolation. That's why in Buddhist communities there's so much emphasis on Sangha, spiritual friendship. Because sometimes we need help remembering we're not the only ones in the mud. And hearing someone else speak from their pain, not to complain, but to connect, reminds us that the path is shared. That rising isn't a competition, it's a movement we support in each other. The lotus also reminds us of timing. Each bloom is different. Some people unfold quickly, others take years. There is no rush. There is no comparison. Buddhism asks you to honor your own pace, to listen to your own roots, and trust that growth is happening, even when it feels like nothing is changing on the surface, and even when suffering revisits, because it always does, the approach changes. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the question becomes, "What can this teach me now?" That shift alone is transformation. It doesn't take away the pain, but it gives it purpose. It turns the mud into something meaningful, something usable. The lotus is also a reminder that we don't have to be cleaned before we're worthy, that beauty and brokenness are not opposites, that resilience isn't about being untouched, it's about being deeply touched and still returning to peace. In Buddhist art, the lotus often appears beneath the Buddha, not because he stood above suffering, but because he rose through it. Because his awakening didn't happen in a perfect world, it happened in a painful one, and so does yours. Each time you breathe into the ache instead of numbing it, each time you pause before reacting to your pain, each time you offer yourself kindness in the middle of the mess, the lotus grows. Not visibly at first, not dramatically, but deeply, steadily, and one day it rises above the surface, open and calm, not in spite of the mud, but because of it. This is why the lotus matters. This is why suffering doesn't ruin the path. It is the path. Because what breaks the heart also opens it. What challenges the mind also strengthens it. And what hurts today may one day be the root of someone else's healing when they hear your story and realize they can bloom too. So don't resent the mud. Don't rush the process. Stay with it. Listen to it. Let it change you, and know that deep beneath the surface, something beautiful is already growing, something no storm can drown, something no darkness can stop. This is the strength of the inner lotus, and it's already alive in you. And when the lotus finally rises, when beauty begins to open out of the mud, it reveals something even deeper underneath the silence. A pulse, a spark, a kind of energy that doesn't settle for calm alone. A fire that comes from looking directly at life's harshest truths and refusing to sleepwalk through them anymore. This is the moment everything shifts. Not because life gets better, but because the illusion breaks, and in that breaking, something fierce wakes up. Buddhism calls this awakening samvega. Samvega is not comfort. It's not peace. It's not soft. It's sharp. It's that feeling that rushes in when the truth hits too hard to ignore. When the smiling mask of life slips, and for a second, everything becomes clear. How fragile it all is. How temporary, how easily everything we cling to disappears. And in that realization, the heart starts beating differently. Not in panic, but in clarity. That's the fire of samvega, the existential shock that doesn't burn you down, but burns away the lies. This feeling isn't talked about often because it's uncomfortable. No one wants to admit that they've built their life on routines that mean nothing, that the job, the status, the constant scrolling, the chasing, it might all be a distraction from something much deeper. But samvega brings that into focus. It's the moment when comfort stops being comfortable and becomes suspicious. When the things that used to soothe now seem hollow. When the background noise of daily life goes silent, and underneath it, there's a question: is this it? The Buddha himself felt samvega. He lived in luxury, surrounded by pleasure and comfort, and yet it wasn't enough. One day, he saw sickness, aging, death, not just as concepts, but as realities, as futures waiting for all of us. And it broke something open, not into despair, but into urgency. That urgency didn't send him running away. It pulled him into something more honest. He left his comforts, not because he hated them, but because he saw through them. And that seeing became the start of everything. This is the gift of samvega. It wakes you up, not gently, but cleanly. It cuts through distraction and puts you face to face with your own impermanence, your own mind, your own wasted time. And instead of collapsing, something deeper rises, a will to change, a refusal to keep numbing, a hunger for truth that doesn't come from curiosity, but from necessity. And that urgency doesn't mean rushing. It doesn't mean panic. It means presence. Every breath becomes precious. Every moment becomes an opportunity to train the mind. Not because there's time to waste, but because there's finally clarity. The awareness that one day this body will stop breathing. That every conversation could be the last. That every morning is a gift you didn't earn. That's not meant to depress you. It's meant to sharpen you. Samvega asks you to stop waiting, to stop living like there will always be more chances, to stop thinking healing can wait until next year or truth will just appear on its own. It asks you to take responsibility, not with guilt, but with power. To see that every time you ignore your inner work, you are silently agreeing to keep suffering. And once you see that clearly, you stop making those quiet agreements. This is where real practice begins. Not because someone told you to meditate, not because it sounds spiritual, but because the voice inside that kept you distracted has finally gone quiet. And in that silence, the desire to wake up becomes stronger than the desire to stay comfortable. And yet, Samvega isn't sustainable by itself. That sharpness, that shock, it has to be balanced. It needs fuel. That's where pasada comes in. It means clarity and confidence. Faith, not in a religion, but in the path. The sense that, yes, this world is fleeting, but something in you is capable of meeting it, capable of rising through it. So, Samvega shakes you, pasada steadies you, and together they build momentum. This momentum is different from motivation. Motivation fades. Samvega doesn't, because it's not emotional, it's existential. It doesn't ask how you feel, it shows you what's real. And once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. You can ignore it, but it'll keep whispering, in the quiet moments, in the mirror, in the sudden sting of a hospital visit or a phone call you didn't expect. That's when the fire reignites. That's when the training calls you back. And training doesn't always look like discipline. Sometimes it's just showing up. Sitting with your thoughts even when they're messy. Watching your patterns even when they hurt. Saying no to the comfort that keeps you numb. That's where strength grows. Not in easy wins, but in showing up after everything soft has been stripped away. Because the truth is, most people live like they'll never die. Like there's endless time. That illusion is cozy, but it's a trap. Samvega breaks it. Not to scare you, but to free you. To remind you that life is urgent. Not in a stressful way, but in a sacred way. Urgent because it matters. Urgent because you don't get to repeat this day, this version of you, this chance to respond with awareness. And once that urgency is alive, everything changes. You stop complaining about small things. You stop needing the approval that used to anchor you. You stop putting off the changes your soul has been begging for. You stop compromising your peace for distractions that never gave it to you in the first place. Urgency makes everything clearer, cleaner, sharper. Even the way you love changes. You no longer wait to express it. You stop assuming people know. You soften, not because you're weak, but because you know the clock is ticking and resentment isn't worth your breath. You forgive quicker, not because the past was okay, but because carrying it forward is a waste of sacred time. That's the kind of emotional clarity that only Samvega brings. And when it comes to your practice, your real, personal, internal work, it's no longer something on your to-do list. It becomes the center, the way you start and end your day. Not because someone told you to, but because you know the cost of drifting. The cost of sleeping through life while waiting for some future version of peace. There is no future version. There's only now. And now is when strength is built. Samvega also dismantles arrogance. When you realize that everything you've built, everything you've earned, every structure you've trusted, all of it can fall apart without warning, You start to walk differently. Not scared, just more awake, more grounded. You become less reactive, not because you're passive, but because you know how much energy is wasted on things that don't matter. That's not detachment, that's focus. And that focus isn't rigid, it's alive, it listens, it adjusts. Because Samvega doesn't make you cold, it makes you precise. You become more kind, not less, more present, not aloof, because you start treating time like the sacred currency it is. You start treating your body like the temporary home that it is. You stop needing drama to feel alive and start finding depth in the simplest moments. A walk, a breath, a conversation held with full attention. This urgency is the fuel behind every serious Buddhist practitioner. Not fear, not pressure, but reverence for life's impermanence, reverence for truth, reverence for the fact that while most people are sleepwalking, you have the chance to wake up. And when you know that, how could you go back to pretending? Samvega breaks the spell. It doesn't offer comfort. It offers clarity, and from that clarity, the path becomes non-negotiable. You walk not because it's easy, but because you've seen the alternative, and you can't go back. You can't unknow what you know now. That's the fire, not a fire that destroys, a fire that clears the way, and that fire, that's the beginning of real strength. Strength that doesn't just show up in calm weather, but in storms. Strength that stays awake when others drift back into distraction. Strength that doesn't need perfection, just presence, just truth, just this next breath, taken with full awareness and full intention. This is the fuel for liberation. This is Samvega. And if you feel it, don't run, don't numb it, let it burn. Let it change the way you walk through the world. Let it wake you up, fully, finally, completely. And once Samvega ignites, once that inner fire of urgency begins burning through illusion, there's a new challenge waiting in the ashes. Distraction, not the obvious kind, but the subtle mental spirals that disguise themselves as curiosity. The need to know everything before taking action. The endless loops of what if, why did, and how come. Even in the middle of transformation, the mind searches for escape routes in the form of endless speculation. This is where Buddhist wisdom draws a sharp line, using one of its simplest but most powerful parables, the story of the poison arrow. A man is struck by an arrow. It hurts, he's bleeding, but instead of removing it, he demands answers. Who shot it? What caste was the person from? What kind of bow did they use? What was the string made of? Which direction did it come from? And the Buddha says, if he waits for all those answers before removing the arrow, he'll die. That's the point. We're already in pain. The work is to heal, not to waste time chasing details that don't help us move forward. This parable isn't just a story. It's a mirror for the way the mind works. Pain shows up in life, and instead of meeting it directly, we get tangled in questions that lead nowhere. Why did this happen to me? Why is life unfair? Why do people change? These aren't bad questions, but they become traps when they keep us stuck, when they keep us analyzing instead of acting, thinking instead of healing, guessing instead of growing. Buddhism doesn't tell you to stop asking questions. It teaches you to ask better ones, ones that bring clarity, not confusion. The purpose of the path isn't to solve every mystery. It's to see through what doesn't matter. Because mental freedom doesn't come from knowing all the answers. It comes from knowing which questions are worth your energy. This is where the practice of letting go becomes precision, not passive, not vague, but deliberate. You begin to notice the mental habits that drain focus, the conversations you replay in your head, the theoretical arguments that never lead to peace, the deep dive into endless opinions that leave you more anxious, not more wise. All of it is noise, and the mind clings to it because distraction feels safer than facing discomfort directly. But focus is a kind of strength, the ability to stay with what matters, to let go of side roads and stay on the path, to notice when you're being pulled into the weeds and return to the breath, to the body, to the now. Every time you drop a question that doesn't lead to truth, you build that strength. The poison arrow also speaks to timing. Life is happening now. Pain is present now. Healing starts now. But speculation delays that healing. It's a clever way the ego keeps control. Because if you're always searching for perfect understanding before you take a step, you never have to risk anything. You get to stay frozen, comfortably lost in thought. But comfort is not clarity, and staying stuck in thought doesn't protect you. It keeps you from change. In practice, this means noticing the moment your mind spirals. You begin to ask, is this useful? Is this leading me to peace? Or is it pulling me away from presence? That's the training. Not just sitting still, but thinking clearly. Protecting your attention like something sacred, because it is. Where your attention goes, your life goes. And if it's scattered, so is your strength. Buddhist teachings return again and again to simplicity. Not because truth is simple, but because distraction is infinite. And when you simplify, you see, you feel, you act, you heal. And all the energy that was being poured into guessing, comparing, overthinking, it gets redirected into awareness, into action, into transformation. Even in relationships, this shows up. Someone hurts you, and instead of feeling the pain and responding with clarity, the mind starts spinning. Why did they do it? What does it mean? Were they ever real? And the arrow stays in, the pain lingers, the story grows, but the healing doesn't begin. The practice is to feel the hurt, not feed the narrative, to move inward, not outward, because the truth you need is rarely out there in someone else's mind. It's already inside, waiting for your attention. And the practice is fierce, because the world rewards speculation. The more questions you ask, the more deep you appear. The more theories you entertain, the more intellectual you seem. But in Buddhism, clarity isn't measured by complexity. It's measured by peace. Can your thoughts end in silence? Can your mind rest in not knowing? Can you accept the mystery without letting it distract you from what's real? The poison arrow reminds you that time is not guaranteed. And while you're busy trying to understand the entire history of your pain, the moment to heal may slip by. That's not fear, it's focus. It's the understanding that life is too brief to waste in loops that never end. Wisdom is knowing when to cut the loop and return to stillness. This kind of mental training isn't glamorous. It doesn't win arguments or prove your intelligence, but it clears space. Space to breathe, to see, to respond with choice instead of habit. And in that space, the arrow comes out. The wound starts to close. Not because you understood every detail, but because you chose to stop bleeding. And it goes deeper. Letting go of useless questions also builds trust. Trust that you don't need to know everything to be okay. That uncertainty can be lived with. That peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from aligning with what's true now. The Buddha didn't become enlightened by solving riddles. He became enlightened by sitting still with the present moment until illusion broke. This doesn't mean you avoid reflection. It means you know when to stop. When the search stops leading to insight and starts circling into restlessness, and when that line is crossed, you return to the breath, to the body, to the heart. You choose focus over fragmentation. You choose peace over proving something. And here's where strength grows. Because in a world that worships mental stimulation, choosing silence is rebellion. Choosing focus is power. Choosing to drop the 10,000 distractions in favor of one clear step. That's courage, because it's easy to get lost in ideas. It's hard to stay present with reality. But presence is where life happens, and the deeper you drop into it, the more awake you become. This clarity doesn't require force, it requires attention, soft, steady attention, noticing when the mind drifts and guiding it back, not with shame, but with patience, over and over. That's meditation, that's mental discipline, that's how the roots of insight grow, quietly, slowly, through repetition, through refusal to chase what doesn't serve. The poison arrow also teaches compassion for yourself, for others. Because once you stop getting caught in unnecessary questions, you start listening differently. You stop arguing just to win. You stop analyzing others like puzzles. You begin to meet people where they are, not in theory, but in truth. You start to hear what's underneath their words, the pain, the hope, the silence, and you respond, not with more questions, but with presence. And presence heals more than answers ever will. It doesn't need to explain, it just needs to be there, fully. And that presence comes from letting go of what doesn't matter, from returning again and again to what does. So when the next distraction comes, the next spiral, the next, "Why did this happen?" Pause. Ask yourself, does this question move me closer to freedom? Or is it another arrow keeping me stuck? And if it's the latter, let it go. Gently, like setting down a heavy bag you didn't know you were carrying. Because the truth is, you don't need every answer. You need focus. You need clarity. You need space to breathe and move and heal. And that space is waiting beneath the noise, beneath the questions, beneath the need to know. That's where strength lives now. Not in knowing more, but in knowing what to drop. And once the poison arrow is dropped, once the endless chase for answers is replaced by steady presence, what begins to surface is a different kind of awareness, one that doesn't move with the noise, one that doesn't rush, one that holds still when everything else pulls. And in Zen, this stillness isn't empty. It's sharp, alive, active in its silence. It's not the absence of movement. It's the presence of full control. And nowhere is that taught more clearly than in the practice of Zen archery. In Zen archery, hitting the target isn't the goal. The real aim is the mind, the focus, the state of being in complete alignment. Every breath, every shift, every draw of the bow is about total awareness. Nothing forced, nothing extra, no trying to impress, no chasing perfection. The arrow is released only when the mind is still, when the breath is true, and when the archer has disappeared into the act itself. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it spiritual. Because this is not about aggression, it's about precision born from calm. The modern world teaches the opposite. Move faster, work harder, hustle constantly. But Zen says, stop. Stop rushing toward everything. Stop trying to conquer life. Instead, meet it fully, without flinching. And that meeting only happens in stillness. Not the kind that collapses under pressure, but the kind that rises above it by refusing to be pulled in every direction. Stillness is not the same as doing nothing. It's not laziness or avoidance. It's the deepest form of engagement, because it means your mind isn't scattered. It's all here, focused, awake. The kind of stillness taught in Zen is like standing in the center of a storm, not because the storm disappeared, but because you've stopped running from it. You've become the calm it can't touch. In Zen archery, there's no rush to shoot. The bow is drawn slowly. The breath is watched. The heartbeat is felt. And only when everything aligns, not through force, but through presence, does the arrow release. And when it does, it flies effortlessly, accurately. Not because it was pushed, but because nothing interfered. That's the lesson. Remove interference. Let what's natural move without tension. This kind of stillness must be trained. It doesn't come from thinking about peace. It comes from building a relationship with silence, with your body, with the now. And Zen archery becomes the metaphor for everything else. Your conversations, your reactions, your choices. Each moment becomes an arrow. Will you release it from stillness or from chaos? In daily life, this stillness looks like pausing before reacting, breathing before speaking, noticing the rise of anger but not grabbing it, feeling fear but not letting it speak for you. Stillness gives you space between the stimulus and the response, and in that space you regain control, not of the world, but of yourself. Most people believe power is loud, but the most powerful presence is the one that doesn't need to speak to be felt. Stillness doesn't broadcast itself. It doesn't beg for validation. But when it enters a room, it changes the energy. People lean in, they listen more, they feel something different. That's what happens when you become fully present, when your mind is no longer leaking energy in every direction. Zen teaches that every action can be meditation. Washing a bowl, walking a hallway, drawing a bow. The task itself is not the point. It's the quality of attention you bring to it, the stillness behind the action. And the more you practice this, the more you notice how often you're not actually here. How often the body is in the room, but the mind is spinning somewhere else. That split is where peace disappears. Stillness stitches the pieces back together. And here's the thing, stillness isn't always comfortable. When the noise fades, you start hearing everything you've been avoiding, the restlessness, the fear, the buried thoughts. But this is where growth begins. Because when you stay instead of running, the silence stops being threatening. It becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, you see clearly. And from that clarity, strength rises. The mind in stillness becomes like a clear lake. It reflects everything, but it clings to nothing. Emotions come and go, thoughts rise and fall, but nothing disturbs the depth. That's not the absence of feeling, it's mastery of it. You still feel, you still care. But you're not drowning. You're rooted, grounded in awareness. And this training doesn't require a bow, it requires attention. When you eat, eat slowly. When you speak, listen before you respond. When you walk, feel your feet. When you rest, truly rest. Each moment is an arrow. If you release it with awareness, it lands clean. If you release it in distraction, it misses, and you spend your life chasing after where it went. The warrior's stillness also teaches patience, not passivity, but the understanding that rushing weakens precision. Whether it's making a decision, healing a wound, or building a path forward, slowness done with intention outlasts speed done in panic. Zen archery isn't about who shoots first, it's about who shoots with truth. And when the world tests you, when criticism, chaos, or uncertainty shows up, your stillness becomes your shield. Because people can provoke you, but they can't move you unless you allow it. The goal isn't to fight everything. It's to be so centered that there's nothing left to pull. That's strength, not needing to strike, but choosing not to. This also changes the way you interact with others. When your presence is grounded, others feel safer. They trust your silence more than someone else's noise. You start to influence without dominating, lead without demanding, teach without preaching, because stillness speaks louder than performance ever could. And in your own practice, stillness becomes the measure. Not how much you know, not how many books you've read, but how quiet your mind can stay when life shakes the ground. Can you stay present in discomfort? Can you keep your breath steady when things go wrong? That's the work, that's the test. Not in theory, but in real moments. Confrontations, deadlines, grief, loneliness. That's where the arrow is drawn. And the way you respond shows how deep the training has gone. Stillness also teaches you to let go of outcome. In Zen archery, the goal is not to hit the target. The goal is to become the kind of person who can shoot with presence, who can release without attachment. That lesson extends to everything. You do your part. You show up fully, but you don't cling to the result. Because when the arrow leaves your hand, it's already out of your control. You trust the process, and then you bow. This kind of trust changes your relationship with failure. It stops being something to fear. It becomes feedback, a reflection, not of your worth, but of where your attention slipped. And instead of collapsing, you return to stillness, to form, to breath. You begin again. That's the quiet strength of the path, never needing to be perfect, only committed to presence. And when you live this way, life simplifies. The need to prove fades. The rush to win disappears. What's left is depth. A kind of presence that doesn't wear out, that doesn't need caffeine or adrenaline to stay awake, that doesn't fall apart when plans change or people misunderstand you. You carry the same stillness through joy and sorrow, success and failure. That's the warrior's stillness. Not a blank stare, not emotional flatness, but a depth of presence that can hold intensity without losing clarity. a silence that can hear what words miss, a calm so steady it becomes contagious. And it starts in small moments. Returning to the body, returning to the breath, noticing the urge to speak and choosing to wait, noticing the tension and choosing to breathe, over and over, until that stillness becomes second nature, until that silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling like home. This is the training, not just for monks, not just for warriors, but for anyone who wants to live with intention instead of reaction, who wants to move through life like a bow drawn with care, focused, grounded, alive. And once the warrior learns stillness, once silence becomes sharper than noise and presence steadier than reaction, something even more subtle begins to unravel beneath the surface. Not a sound, not a thought, but a deeper identity. One that's been quietly shaping every action, every reaction, every story. It's the self, the label, the inner character we've all been taught to build and defend. And now, the path takes a sharp turn. Not toward becoming more, but toward unlearning. Not toward finding a bigger identity, but toward dissolving the one that was never real. This is where Buddhism turns everything upside down, revealing a freedom most never find. The freedom from self. From the very beginning, identity gets assigned. First by others, names, roles, expectations, and then by ourselves, slowly building a mental image of who we are based on what we've done, how people see us, what we've gained or lost. That image becomes armor, and that armor becomes prison, because every time it's threatened by failure, by rejection, by change, the entire structure shakes. And most people spend their lives holding it up, patching the cracks, defending the illusion. But Buddhism teaches that this self we protect doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does. It's not a solid thing. It's a collection of memories, labels, preferences, and roles, none of which are stable, none of which define the core. And yet we cling to them, suffer for them, feel shame over them, because the idea of being nothing terrifies us more than any pain. This is where the real strength begins to build, not in fixing the self, but in letting go of the belief that you are that self. Because shame only sticks when there's a self to wound. Guilt only grows when it has a me to punish. Doubt only circles when it believes there's someone who must prove their worth. But when the self is seen as a concept, those emotions lose their grip. They still arise, but they don't stay. They don't define. This isn't about being emotionless. It's about seeing through the structure of identity that magnifies every emotion into a crisis. When the self is loosened, everything softens. Criticism becomes information. Mistakes become moments. There's no I to defend, only presence to return to. And that presence doesn't need identity to exist. It simply is. In meditation, this becomes clearer. You sit, thoughts come, feelings rise, memories appear. But who do they appear to? Who is the one watching? That silent awareness, that ungraspable space behind all the noise, that's closer to truth than any personality trait or label you've carried. The more you observe, the more you realize you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your name or your story or even your face in the mirror. You are the space they move through. Unlearning the self doesn't mean disappearing. It means stop clinging. Stop building your worth on unstable ground. Stop needing others to reflect a version of you back in order to feel valid. That's emotional invincibility, not because you're cold, but because you're free. Free from the need to prove, to perform, to be someone special in order to be at peace. And that peace changes everything. When you're not caught in self-definition, you start to listen better, respond cleaner, speak with less weight. Actions become simpler because they're not trying to sculpt an identity. They're just honest expressions of presence. Compassion becomes more natural because there's no ego to protect, just shared humanity, shared pain, shared awareness. This also frees you from the past, because most regret comes from judging who you were. I can't believe I did that. I used to be this. I'm no longer that. But when you see that self as temporary, those stories soften. You weren't a fixed person back then. You were a collection of thoughts, feelings, and reactions. And now you're another one, and tomorrow another. This insight doesn't make you numb. It makes you forgiving. It lets you breathe again, and even the future changes. Because identity is often projected forward. I need to become someone. I need to live up to this version. I need to be remembered this way. But once you stop needing to be anyone in particular, the future becomes lighter. Not empty, just unburdened. You still grow, still serve, still act. But not from a place of needing to be seen, from a place of truth, of alignment, of flow. The Buddhist teaching of anatta, or non-self, isn't nihilism. It's liberation. It doesn't say nothing matters. It says clinging to a fixed self causes suffering. And by loosening that grip, we find space to live more fully, more openly, more awake. This also transforms your relationships. When you're not trapped in a role, parent, child, leader, healer, you can meet others without filters, without needing to be admired or feared or loved a certain way. You show up as presence. And in that presence, something honest unfolds, something not shaped by identity, but by connection. And when conflict happens, as it always does, unlearning the self allows for forgiveness, because you stop needing to be right in order to feel whole. You stop needing others to agree in order to feel safe. That flexibility is strength. It means you can bend without breaking. You can hear hard truths without crumbling. You can walk away from judgment without carrying it home. Even in solitude, the benefit appears. The fear of being alone is often the fear of being with no identity, no reflection, no audience. But when the self quiets, solitude becomes nourishing, not lonely, but spacious. You meet your own awareness like an old friend. No performance, no roles, just being. And that being is enough. This kind of freedom can't be faked. It's not about rejecting all labels loudly. It's about no longer being bound by them inwardly. You can still have a name, a story, a style, but they no longer own you. They're useful tools, not your core. That shift happens slowly, gently, through mindfulness, through questioning, through watching the self arise and fall 1,000 times until you finally stop mistaking it for truth. And then something strange happens. The less you cling to self, the more natural your actions become. Kindness flows easier, creativity flows freer. Decisions come with less inner noise, because the pressure to be someone is gone. And all that's left is presence, awareness, action rooted in now, not in image. This is what Buddhism means when it speaks of true strength. Not the kind that resists shame, but the kind that sees shame clearly and doesn't attach. Not the kind that fights guilt, but the kind that sees it arise and pass without feeding it. Not the kind that never doubts, but the kind that sees doubt as a passing cloud, not a permanent truth. And it's not about being above pain. It's about no longer identifying with it. You can feel grief without becoming it. You can feel anger without being consumed. You can feel joy without trying to trap it, because you're no longer the one riding the wave. You're the ocean underneath. This doesn't mean the work ends. The self will keep rising. It's sneaky. It wants to reappear through pride, through comparison, through subtle self-importance. But now you know the game. You catch it. You smile. You return to breath, to now, to what's real. This return is the path, over and over. Unlearning the self, returning to presence, moving from that space without attachment. And in doing so, you find a kind of emotional invincibility that doesn't need armor, doesn't need applause, doesn't need anything but clarity. You are not your name, not your trauma, not your titles. You are what notices them all. And once the grip of self begins to dissolve, once the mind no longer builds its worth around shifting roles and fragile identities, something even deeper becomes clear. It's not just who we think we are that shapes our experience. It's what we think we see. The world doesn't always hurt us with what it is. It hurts us with how we see it. And this is where Buddhism turns its light toward perception itself. Because if perception bends reality, then fear is often not about danger. It's about distortion. And nowhere is this lesson made clearer than in the story of the rope and the snake. A traveler walks through the woods and sees a snake on the path. His heart races, his body freezes, fear floods in. But when he steps closer, he sees it's just a rope. No danger, no threat, just a misperception. But in that moment, the fear was real. The stress was real. His reaction, his panic, all of it came from something that didn't exist. This is not just a story, it's a metaphor for how the mind works every day. And the more clearly we see this, the less power fear holds. Perception doesn't just shape how we feel, it shapes what we believe, what we avoid, what we chase. And when perception is distorted, we react to life in ways that don't match what's really happening. Someone frowns, and we assume they're angry. A message goes unanswered, and we believe we're being rejected. A change arrives, and we treat it like a threat instead of an opening. Fear slips in quietly, not through facts, but through misreading them. The rope and the snake story teaches a kind of mental training that is central to Buddhist practice. Pause, look closer, and question what you think is true. Because most fear begins with misperception, and most freedom begins with clarity. The more we train our mind to see clearly, the less we're controlled by the shadows it creates. This doesn't mean fear isn't real. It means fear often reacts before truth arrives. The body feels it instantly. The heart races. The thoughts spin. But fear's power doesn't come from danger. It comes from confusion. When you learn to slow down and look again, you give the mind time to correct the story, to check the facts. And in that space, courage begins. Fearlessness isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to react to what hasn't been truly seen. Buddhism trains this through mindfulness, watching thoughts without believing them, observing feelings without being swept away, noticing the stories your mind tells and asking, is this a rope or a snake? This practice starts with awareness. When fear arises, the first response is not to push it away or analyze it to death. The first step is to breathe and pause, to let the first wave pass without judgment. Fear wants urgency, it wants movement. But the moment you pause, you take back your power. You stop reacting and you start investigating. And here's where perception begins to shift. You realize how many fears aren't yours. They were inherited. Stories passed down, assumptions picked up along the way, fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. They didn't start with you. They were learned, and like the snake in the story, they can be unlearned too. This unlearning doesn't mean pretending fear is gone. It means learning to live beside it without letting it lead. It means looking at the rope and saying, I see what my mind is doing. I see how it's trying to protect me, but I'm not fooled this time. That's not denial. That's insight. That's what real courage is made of. Courage doesn't look like bravado. It looks like stillness in the face of rising panic. It looks like not turning away from discomfort. It looks like asking, what's really here? And when you look closely, you often find the thing you feared has no teeth, just noise, just memories, just perception twisted by habit. Buddhist psychology teaches that perception is one of the 5 aggregates, the building blocks of experience. And because perception is always filtered through conditioning, it must be questioned. That's why so much of Buddhist meditation isn't about stopping thoughts. It's about seeing them clearly. Watching how fear colors perception, watching how desire distorts it too, and slowly, gently retraining the eyes. When you see through distortion, the mind starts to relax. Not because life becomes perfect, but because clarity removes confusion. A rope is just a rope. An unanswered message is just a delay. A change in someone's mood isn't always about you. These realizations don't remove challenge, but they remove unnecessary suffering. That's what perception training gives: less confusion, more truth. And it's not just emotional clarity, it's psychological strength. The kind of strength that comes from knowing your reactions aren't always reality. The kind that lets you hold your fear with open hands instead of clenched fists. The kind that gives you room to respond instead of just react. In everyday life, this practice becomes essential. In conversations, in conflict, in decision-making. How often do we see snakes where there are none? We misinterpret tone. We assume bad intent. We project our past onto someone else's silence, and in doing so we create stress where there could have been peace. But perception can be retrained. Retraining starts with slowing down, with listening more, with noticing the first story the mind tells, and waiting before you act on it. It means giving yourself permission to be wrong about your first interpretation. And in that humility, new options appear. New understandings emerge. The rope reveals itself. And this has profound effects on relationships. Fear often shows up in the gap between perception and truth. When we assume the worst, we shut down, we lash out, we withdraw. But when we pause and ask, what if I'm misreading this? Something shifts. Compassion enters, curiosity enters. We stop defending and we start connecting. This also builds inner confidence. Because the less fooled you are by your own fear, the steadier you become. You stop needing every situation to be safe before you feel okay. You start trusting your ability to meet life with awareness instead of anxiety. That's not perfection, that's power. And the truth is, perception is always changing. What you once feared becomes familiar. What once overwhelmed you becomes a lesson. The mind can adapt, but it needs guidance. Without awareness, it runs old scripts. With awareness, it updates. That's the work. Not to force perception into something ideal, but to align it closer to reality. The rope and the snake also teach presence, because distortion often lives in the future or the past. We see snakes not because they're here, but because something from before tells us to expect them. But the rope, it's right here, now, and when we stay present, the mind doesn't need to predict, it can just observe. And in observation, fear softens. This kind of clarity also allows for quicker recovery. Fear may still arise, triggers may still appear, but you catch them sooner, you come back faster, you don't spiral as long, and every time you return to truth, your strength grows. Quietly, steadily, like light returning after a storm. The Buddhist path isn't about becoming fearless in the sense of never feeling afraid. It's about developing the wisdom to know when fear is real and when it's just a rope. That wisdom is built in silence, in stillness, in patient investigation, and the more you build it, the more freedom you gain. Because freedom doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like not panicking. Sometimes it looks like staying steady when the old story starts playing again. Sometimes it looks like saying, I don't know if this is a rope or a snake yet, but I'll find out. And in that space, the mind opens, the breath returns, the reaction softens, and you get to choose your next step instead of being pulled by fear's first impulse. This is perception training, not to remove all fear, but to build the strength that keeps fear from driving, to become more honest with yourself, to stop confusing the first thought with the final truth, and to let each moment teach you how to see a little clearer than before. And once the rope is seen for what it is, once perception clears and fear loses its hold, a new question begins to rise from the quiet. If clarity brings peace, why does restlessness still return? Why does the mind, even after seeing through illusion, keep searching, grasping, reaching? Because fear isn't the only force that distorts the present. Craving does too. The ache for more. The tension of not enough. The itch to escape what is and chase what could be. This is where the next layer of practice begins, not in silence, but in fire, in the furnace of frustration. In Buddhism, craving is called tanha, thirst. It is the engine of suffering. Not because wanting is bad, but because the kind of wanting that never rests keeps the mind spinning in circles. It tells you, once I get this, I'll feel okay. Once they respond, I'll feel whole. Once this changes, I can breathe. But the truth is, even when the craving is fulfilled, it's never enough. Satisfaction flickers, then disappears, and the mind moves to the next thing, always forward, never still. This craving isn't just about material things, it's psychological, emotional, craving for certainty, for recognition, for control, for a version of life that finally feels safe and finished. But life doesn't stop shifting. People don't stop changing. The body doesn't stop aging. And so the craving becomes permanent tension, never satisfied, never silent. But here's where Buddhism offers something radical. It doesn't tell you to hate your cravings. It tells you to study them, to use them, to turn the very fire of dissatisfaction into a training ground for strength. Because craving isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. If you meet it directly, if you stop running from it and start walking through it with awareness. This begins with mindfulness. The moment craving arises, you pause. You feel it, not just as thought, but as sensation. The way your chest tightens, the way your breathing changes, the way your focus narrows to that one thing you think you need. That's the start of the training, not in resisting with force, but in witnessing with precision, not acting out the craving, not indulging it automatically, but also not repressing it with shame. Just holding it, watching it, letting it show its full face without reacting. And in that space, something begins to shift. You start to see craving as movement, as energy, not as identity, not as instruction. You realize, this urge is here, but it's not me. It's not truth. It's just a pattern rising and falling in the mind. That insight builds a gap, and in that gap, choice returns. You can say no, not out of guilt, but out of clarity. You can sit with the desire without feeding it, and in doing that, you begin to melt the mental habits that once ruled you. Every moment you don't give in is a moment of strength being built, not by force, but by patience. You become steady, spacious, unmoved by urges that used to control you, and the fire becomes useful, because it reveals where your attachments live. What you crave most intensely often shows you where your identity is tangled. The desire to be liked, to succeed, to be seen a certain way. These aren't random. They point to where the self is still clinging. And if you follow that thread mindfully, you can begin to untangle it. Craving is also a mirror. It reflects how deeply you believe peace is always somewhere else, somewhere later. Once you lose the weight, once the relationship works, once the job feels secure. But Buddhism invites a different path. It says peace is now. But it's buried under the illusion that something else must happen first. Craving is that illusion, and sitting with it, not acting on it, burns it down. This doesn't mean you stop wanting things. It means you stop being ruled by the wanting. You can have goals, you can move toward change, but without the inner grasping, without the belief that happiness is only possible once something else happens. That belief is the source of suffering, not the goal itself, but the desperation beneath it. And craving isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. The subtle dissatisfaction with how your day went. The quiet resentment that things didn't feel as good as you hoped. The underlying tension of always needing to be somewhere else, someone else, doing something more. That's craving too, and it adds up. It wears down your presence, your patience, your ability to rest in the now. But the moment you catch it, mid-thought, mid-desire, mid-frustration, you can change the trajectory. You can soften the grip. You can return to the breath. And every time you do that, your discipline grows, not as punishment, but as strength built from clarity. You're not fighting the craving, you're seeing through it. And what you see is this: craving creates dissatisfaction not because it fails, but because it promises something it can't deliver. It promises permanent relief. But the mind that gets what it wants is the same mind that will want again. So Buddhism doesn't chase relief, it trains presence, so that peace isn't conditional, so that you're not dependent on the world matching your preferences to feel okay. This also shifts how you handle pain, because often craving arises as escape, wanting to feel different, to distract, to numb, to avoid. But when you learn to stay with discomfort, to not reach for the usual fix, you start to build a different kind of resilience, the kind that doesn't come from changing what you feel, but from being able to hold what you feel without breaking. And over time, this changes your nervous system, your stress response, your emotional patterns, because every time you sit with craving without reacting, you send the body a new message. I'm safe here. I can stay. I don't need to run. That message rewires everything. It builds a groundedness that no achievement or relationship can give, because it's not built on having, it's built on letting go. And this has ripple effects everywhere, in how you eat, how you scroll, how you speak, how you respond to irritation. Craving touches all of it, and so mindfulness must enter all of it, not to shame you, but to train you, to turn your ordinary habits into sacred ground. Every time you feel the pull toward what you don't need and pause instead, you plant a seed of strength, of freedom, of a mind that doesn't flinch, because frustration itself isn't failure, it's fuel. It shows you where your edges are, where your discipline is still growing, where your peace still depends on control, and instead of avoiding that heat, you meet it. You enter the furnace not to burn up, but to burn through the illusion that you need more to be okay, through the lie that you can't sit with what is, through the belief that peace lives later, not now. And this practice isn't easy. It will test your patience, your pride, your old coping strategies. But every time you come back to the breath instead of the craving, every time you choose stillness over escape, you become stronger, not visibly, not dramatically, but deeply, quietly. With each decision not to feed the fire, you become the space around it. And eventually, the craving changes. It loses its urgency. It starts to feel familiar, manageable, not because you forced it down, but because you watched it so many times it stopped fooling you. And in its place, something else grows. Contentment, not the loud joy of pleasure, but the soft steadiness of enough. You no longer need everything to change for your peace to stay. You no longer collapse when something you want slips away. You no longer panic when the next high doesn't arrive. That's freedom. Not because craving is gone, but because it no longer commands your life. The furnace didn't burn you. It refined you. The heat didn't destroy. It revealed what was solid beneath the impulse. And now that strength walks with you, in small moments, in silent decisions, in the quiet courage to want and not follow, to feel lack and still stay present. This is the path of using craving as fuel, not to chase, but to transform, not to get more, but to need less, not to silence desire, but to stop believing it controls who you are. And once the fire of craving has been endured, once you've sat through the burn without reaching, without numbing, without flinching, what's left is not exhaustion, but something calmer, a kind of stillness that feels earned. But life doesn't always burn in flames. Sometimes it strikes like a storm, sudden, cold, disorienting, and it's not about desire anymore. It's about reaction. The snap in your breath when things don't go your way. The tightening in your chest when someone pushes your limits. The jolt of judgment, panic, or insult. This is the next level of strength. Staying still in the storm, not hiding, not suppressing, but mastering the art of non-reactivity. The Buddhist cold shower for the mind. Non-reactivity doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means you stop becoming the feeling. You learn to hold the heat without spilling, the cold without shutting down. You witness the wave rise and you let it break, without lashing out, without escaping, without letting it drag you under. That's the training. And like a cold shower, it's uncomfortable at first, but it builds something most people never touch: emotional resilience born from stillness under pressure. Equanimity, in Buddhist terms, is the mind's balance point, the place where peace doesn't come from comfort, but from steadiness. You don't need things to be easy to feel okay. You don't collapse when they aren't. And the way to build this is the same way you'd train the body for cold: exposure. Deliberate, repeated exposure to discomfort. Not to become numb, but to become clear. To teach the system, you are safe. You don't have to react. This training happens in the small moments first. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your phone glitches. A plan gets cancelled. The mind wants to fire off. But instead of obeying the impulse, you pause. You feel the heat rise. You notice the breath shift. And then you stay. No explosion, no story, just presence. That moment, tiny, silent, is where strength builds. Not in the dramatic victories, but in the 1,000 times you chose stillness over reaction. And like cold exposure, the mind fights back at first. It says, react now. Say something. Fix this. Punish them. But when you breathe through that signal, you interrupt the loop. You retrain your nervous system. You show your body and mind that discomfort is not danger, that not every pain is a crisis, that not every impulse needs a response. This changes the way you handle emotions too. Anger, sadness, jealousy, they still show up. But you stop treating them like emergencies. You treat them like weather, storms that pass, feelings to witness, not follow. That's equanimity, not coldness, clarity, not resistance, acceptance, and it turns your mind into something unshakable, not because life gets easier, but because your relationship with difficulty changes. Think of non-reactivity like sitting under a waterfall. The force of emotion hits, but instead of being swept away, you root yourself. You feel it fully, but you don't lose yourself in it. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, the waves lose their power, not because they're smaller, but because you're deeper. This is why Buddhist monks train in silence, why they walk slowly, why they bow, eat, and move with deliberate attention. It's not for show, it's training. Each moment becomes a chance to feel a rising urge and not follow it. To notice impatience and breathe through it. To meet irritation with stillness instead of speed. The outer calm reflects the inner one, built through repetition, not accident. And this training isn't limited to monasteries. It's for everywhere, in your work, your home, your relationships. Because the world will test your edges. People will misunderstand you. Events will shake your plans. Emotions will rise fast. But if you've built the capacity to pause, to feel without obeying, you stay steady. You become the calm in the room. This doesn't mean you tolerate injustice or swallow your voice. It means your response is clean, thoughtful, grounded. Non-reactivity gives you choice. The ability to decide what serves instead of reacting from what hurts. It breaks the habit of exploding or collapsing. It creates space between trigger and action, and in that space, freedom lives. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is that we don't suffer because of what happens, but because of how we react to what happens. The event passes, the reaction lingers, it repeats, it digs in. But when you train the mind not to cling to every emotion, not to chase or resist every wave, the suffering softens. You feel everything, but you carry none of it longer than needed. Even the body responds. When you stop reacting automatically, your nervous system learns that stillness is safe. The stress cycle shortens. The breath deepens. Your baseline calm increases. This isn't theory, it's physiology. Reaction burns energy, stillness stores it. That's why people who train in non-reactivity feel different. Not just emotionally, but energetically. Their presence isn't loud, but it's solid. And you don't need hours of meditation to start. You just need the next moment, the next irritation, the next tension. When it comes, pause, breathe, feel the reaction rising, and choose not to feed it. Watch it like a scientist, label it without judgment, let it pass. That's the rep, that's the cold shower. Every time you do it, the mind becomes less reactive, and the space inside you becomes larger. This also changes your sense of identity, because so much of who we think we are is built from reaction. I'm an angry person. I'm anxious. I'm sensitive. But when you stop reacting, you start questioning those labels. You realize, I'm not my impulse. I'm not my mood. I'm not this wave of emotion. I'm the space it's moving through. That realization is not just insight, it's liberation. And the more you practice, the more surprises come. Things that used to shake you don't. People who used to trigger you don't. Not because they changed, but because you did. You became less available for chaos, less hooked by drama, less reactive to things that used to steal your peace. That's not ego, that's freedom. Even the practice of watching the breath becomes a tool here, because the breath is always neutral. It doesn't judge, it doesn't argue. When you return to it, you return to a space untouched by the story. That's why it's the anchor, the cold water for the mind, the reminder that underneath all of this, you are still here, still aware, still calm. And eventually, you stop fearing discomfort. You stop fearing emotion, because you've trained with it, sat with it, passed through it without acting on it. And once you know you can do that, you walk differently. Not with arrogance, with peace, a peace that isn't shaken by every storm, a peace that doesn't need silence to exist, but creates it. This isn't perfection, it's practice. There will be moments you react. That's okay. You return, you breathe, you learn, and slowly your baseline changes. The default becomes calm, the response becomes choice, and the storm passes through you instead of pulling you into it. This is the strength of non-reactivity, not flashy, not dramatic, but life-changing. Because in a world constantly triggering, pushing, and pulling, being still is the most radical thing you can do. And after enough time in the cold, after sitting through the shock of discomfort without reacting, without running, something else begins to grow underneath the skin. Stillness that doesn't tremble. A kind of quiet that's not passive, but powerful. A presence that no longer flinches when pressure rises or when life tests your edges. This is not numbness. It's not distance. It's something deeper, more grounded. It's what Buddhism points to when it speaks of the mind as a mountain, not because it doesn't feel, but because it doesn't move. Now the training goes inward, not to escape the world, but to anchor within it. This is the core of Buddhist meditation, not to float above life, but to become unshakable in the middle of it. Meditation in this context isn't about achieving bliss or reaching special states. It's about presence. It's about building a mind so steady that even when the world stirs with chaos, even when emotions try to pull you under, even when thoughts scream for your attention, you remain. Not as a wall, but as a witness. Not cut off from life, but deeply rooted in it. The image of the mountain isn't about detachment from reality. It's about a connection so deep, so grounded, that nothing on the surface can uproot it. And the process begins the moment you sit. When the body is still, the mind reveals its habits, the urge to fix, to chase, to problem solve, the itch to label, to predict, to escape. All of it shows up. Not because you're failing, but because you're finally paying attention. And in that awareness, you start to see what usually drives you, the thoughts you confuse for truth, the feelings you mistake for commands, and instead of being pulled by them, you observe. You breathe, you sit. Over time, this sitting becomes more than just posture. It becomes a statement. I will not run. I will not hide. I will stay. And the more you stay, the more you build the capacity to remain unshaken, not because storms stop coming, but because you stop getting lost in them. The mountain doesn't stop the weather, it holds through it. That's the strength you're cultivating. And this stillness is active. It sees everything, hears everything, feels everything, but it doesn't get entangled. The mind becomes wide enough to hold pain without panic, spacious enough to hold joy without clinging, present enough to witness the full spectrum of life without collapsing into it. This isn't easy, but it's what changes everything. At first, it may feel impossible. The thoughts won't slow down, the body fidgets, the emotions rise in waves. But the practice is not to fix those things, it's to let them be there without becoming them. When sadness arises, you don't drown, you watch. When anger spikes, you don't erupt, you breathe. When fear whispers, you don't run, you return to now. That's the discipline. That's the quiet revolution taking place inside you. And this doesn't just affect your inner world, it transforms your outer one too, because the stronger your presence becomes, the less you react out of fear, the less you speak from insecurity, the less you fall into habits that hurt you. You start responding instead of reacting, listening instead of defending, pausing instead of pushing. And in that shift, your relationships soften, your decisions sharpen, your energy steadies. The mountain doesn't reject the world, it holds space for it. And meditation trains you to do the same. When conflict arises, you meet it with presence. When uncertainty hits, you meet it with breath. When things don't go your way, you don't collapse into frustration. You stay rooted, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped needing control to feel safe. This kind of mind isn't developed overnight. It's carved slowly, like stone, shaped by time, by repetition, by returning again and again to the same still point. Each sight deepens it. Each breath steadies it. And even when you think nothing's happening, the roots are growing. You may not notice at first, but others will. They'll feel something in you that doesn't shake the way it used to, that doesn't panic when plans change, that doesn't get thrown off by noise. And it's not because you've escaped life. It's because you've turned toward it fully and stayed. That's what builds the mountain. The willingness to remain when discomfort shows up, to face your own patterns without turning away, to meet silence not as an enemy, but as a home. Meditation also teaches that strength is not found in force, but in presence. You don't silence the mind by wrestling it. You calm it by watching. You don't stop thoughts by pushing them away. You let them pass like clouds over a vast sky. The more space you give them, the less they control you. The mountain doesn't chase the clouds. It lets them come and go, and it stays. And that same strength begins to show up in daily life. You notice the space between impulse and action. You feel the pull to speak, but you choose to listen. You hear the old story rising, and you don't feed it. That's what meditation gives, not control over everything, but mastery over your own inner world. Even in crisis, this training holds. When grief hits, when fear returns, when everything feels like too much, you don't have to pretend you're okay. You just have to stay present, to keep breathing, to keep returning. That's what the mountain does. It doesn't avoid the storm. It faces it, and it holds. And over time, meditation becomes more than a practice. It becomes a way of being. You don't have to sit in silence to be present. You bring the mountain into every interaction, into traffic, into meetings, into hard conversations, into heartbreak. You begin to live from that place, from presence, from depth, from a quiet that doesn't ask for attention, but radiates stability. And this depth becomes a refuge. When life is loud, you return to breath. When thoughts race, you return to stillness. When others react, you respond from center. And you begin to see how much suffering is optional, how much chaos comes not from life, but from our refusal to pause before we move, from our habit of reacting before we breathe. Meditation breaks that habit. It rewires the nervous system to wait, to witness, to stay. And in doing that, it creates a mind that doesn't need to be perfect to be peaceful. A mind that doesn't need answers to feel whole. A mind that is no longer pulled by every passing emotion, but anchored in the now. This isn't passive peace, it's active presence, and it's built through every sit, every breath, every time you close your eyes, not to escape, but to see more clearly, to feel more honestly, to respond more wisely. That's the path, and it's not far away. It's one breath deep, over and over, until the storm no longer controls you, until the world can shift and turn and roar, and you stay right here, still, grounded, awake. This is the mountain that watches. And once the mind becomes a mountain, once presence becomes strong enough to hold still through storms, the next challenge is not how to withstand chaos, but how to stop inviting it. Because even when the world quiets, the noise inside doesn't always follow. It clings to stimulation, to options, to endless things that feel important. And slowly, silently, that noise steals the strength that was just built. This is where the deeper work begins, not by adding more, but by choosing less. Voluntary simplicity isn't just about a lifestyle, it's about mental freedom. It's the art of removing distractions, not to live with lack, but to make space for clarity, focus, and real peace. In Buddhist practice, simplicity is not deprivation, it's design. The monastic codes that guide monks and nuns aren't punishments, they're tools. Fewer belongings mean fewer decisions. Fewer decisions mean fewer mental loops. Less clutter outside equals less chaos inside. The whole system is built to reduce unnecessary friction, not because comfort is wrong, but because simplicity reveals what actually matters. What remains when the rest is stripped away isn't emptiness, it's strength. The mind is not naturally quiet. It pulls toward choice, it wants variety, it craves stimulation. But too much choice weakens resolve. Too many options split attention, and attention is power. Wherever it leaks, your energy follows. Simplicity trains that energy back into one place, this moment, this breath, this task. Not because it's trendy, but because divided focus is diluted living. And this isn't just about physical possessions. It's about commitments, habits, mental clutter. How many tabs are open in your mind right now? How much of your attention is held hostage by things you don't even care about deeply? Simplicity isn't about having nothing. It's about needing less, wanting less. And in that wanting less, building more space for stillness, for creativity, for connection. There's a reason monasteries look plain. It's not because beauty is denied, it's because distraction is. When your room is bare, the mind can't jump from object to object. It returns to the breath, to awareness. And this design spills into daily life. When you reduce the mental traffic, each moment becomes sharper. You stop multitasking. You stop checking out. You start living with full attention again. Voluntary simplicity also protects discipline, because when the world keeps offering you more, it takes strength to say no, to choose silence over scrolling, to choose rest over another obligation, to choose depth over novelty. And every time you do, you reinforce your inner clarity, not out of denial, but out of knowing the cost of overstimulation, the cost of always reaching for something new while the present moment waits unnoticed. This doesn't mean life becomes boring. It means it becomes intentional. When you eat, you eat. When you speak, you speak. When you walk, you feel your feet. Each action becomes sacred, not because of what it is, but because of the space you gave it. That's what simplicity offers. Not the removal of joy, but the return of presence to things you forgot were joyful. And the mind, when it adjusts, starts craving less automatically. Once it experiences the peace of fewer distractions, it stops chasing stimulation as much. The nervous system recalibrates. The dopamine feedback loops slow down. You stop needing constant noise to feel alive. And in the quiet, you realize that most of what you thought you needed was only blocking you from seeing what was already here. In practice, this might mean owning fewer clothes, or saying no to more events, or leaving more space in your schedule, or deleting apps that steal your focus. But beneath all that, the real simplicity is internal. It's how many identities you carry, how many expectations, how many mental checklists you run every hour. When those drop, what remains is clean, focused, grounded. Even monks who live with almost nothing aren't practicing poverty. They're practicing freedom, because the less they have, the more attention they reclaim. And with that attention, they train, they serve, they reflect, they deepen. That's the core principle. Clear space equals clear mind, and a clear mind is unshakable. But in modern life, simplicity has to be chosen. No one hands it to you. The default is complexity, more notifications, more choices, more noise. Choosing less becomes an act of rebellion, not against the world, but for your own peace. And that choice doesn't have to be extreme. One quiet morning, one unplanned evening, one walk without your phone. Each moment of less is a doorway into more. This also sharpens your values, because when you reduce the noise, what matters most becomes obvious. You stop spreading yourself thin. You stop saying yes to things that don't align. Simplicity becomes a filter, not just for stuff, but for decisions. You ask, does this nourish or distract? Does this add to peace or pull me away from it? And that filter protects your energy like nothing else. And simplicity reveals another gift, contentment. Not the kind you force, the kind that arrives when there's space for it, when you're no longer comparing, no longer racing, no longer convincing yourself that happiness is one more thing away. In the space left by simplicity, gratitude grows. You start seeing the ordinary as beautiful again. You start noticing the sky, the breath, the texture of silence. This is also why monastic schedules are repetitive. The same meals, the same robes, the same rhythm. Because removing novelty doesn't kill joy. It deepens presence. Without chasing something new, the mind relaxes into what is, and what is becomes enough. In that enoughness, strength grows, not the strength of control, but the strength of not needing to control everything. And you don't have to become a monk to feel this. You just have to practice letting go of the extra, not with harshness, with wisdom. Look at your space, your habits, your mind. Ask what's useful and what's just noise. Ask what you'd keep if your peace was the goal, not your image, not your productivity, just your peace. And let the answers guide you. Maybe you stop checking the news 10 times a day. Maybe you stop chasing the perfect plan. Maybe you stop overcommitting out of guilt. Each time you remove something that scatters your mind, you reclaim a piece of your strength. The kind of strength that doesn't show up in busy schedules, but in grounded choices. And in relationships, simplicity softens things too. You stop needing people to perform. You stop performing yourself. You start valuing presence over perfection, a real conversation, a shared silence, time that doesn't need to prove its worth. That's what simplicity brings, depth, not through intensity, but through consistency. This way of life isn't flashy, but it's powerful, because when you're not constantly chasing, you can finally receive. When you're not buried in complexity, you can finally breathe. And when your mind isn't full of noise, you can finally hear the quiet truth underneath it all, that you don't need more to be whole. You just need space. And when the clutter is cleared, when life is trimmed down to its essence and the mind finally has room to breathe, something strange begins to happen. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop feeling the pull to prove yourself. The urge to react, to defend, to push back at every discomfort no longer feels necessary. Because simplicity hasn't just lightened your surroundings, it's softened the need for conflict. And now, the deeper lesson reveals itself. True strength isn't always shown by action, it's often shown by restraint. Buddhism calls this wisdom, the wisdom of knowing when not to fight. In a world that constantly tells you to speak up, fight back, be bold, and always stand your ground, this idea might feel like weakness, but it isn't. Non-resistance, when done from awareness, not fear, is a power most never develop. Because anyone can react, anyone can shout, anyone can strike back when they feel threatened. But to pause, to assess, to choose peace over ego, that's control, that's mastery, that's strength disguised as stillness. This doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It doesn't mean avoiding confrontation out of fear. It means developing the inner clarity to know which battles are truly worth your energy, and which are simply invitations to lose your peace. It's the difference between instinct and intention begins where reactivity ends. Buddhist teachings emphasize non-attachment, not only to objects or outcomes, but also to being right, to having the last word, to getting recognition. So many fights are just ego battles, trying to defend a self-image that's not even real. And when the identity loosens, so does the urge to protect it. You stop defending illusions, and you start defending your inner stillness instead. Walking away doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes it means stepping back to preserve what actually matters: your clarity, your values, your peace. It means recognizing that not every insult is worth a response, that not every challenge needs your fire, because not all conflicts are about truth. Some are just storms passing through other people's unprocessed emotions, and jumping in doesn't make you strong, it makes you tangled. Knowing when not to fight also sharpens your vision. You start to see patterns, which arguments repeat, which dynamics drain, which situations only pull you further from the person you're training to become. And instead of diving into every emotional whirlpool, you stand at the edge, you breathe, you watch, you wait. And in that waiting, you choose your next move from awareness, not emotion. This is what the Buddha did again and again. When challenged, he often remained silent, not because he didn't have answers, but because he understood the energy behind the question. Was it coming from genuine curiosity, or from the need to trap, to test, to provoke? He wasn't reactive, he was deliberate. He didn't lose power in silence, he owned it. And that's what this training gives you. The ability to hold your center when others lose theirs. The ability to walk away not with shame, but with strength. The ability to respond without being dragged into battles that leave everyone more broken than before. Even in relationships, this wisdom heals. Not every disagreement needs a verdict. Not every misunderstanding needs to be dissected. Sometimes the deeper strength is in choosing to stay quiet until the heart is calm, until the heat has passed, until the truth can be spoken without the need to win. This doesn't mean suppressing, it means choosing. Choosing the moment, choosing the tone, choosing whether the outcome is worth the emotional cost. And if it's not, choosing to let it go, not out of weakness, but because you're building a life that's not fueled by conflict. And this choice is subtle. It happens in real time, in the pause before you respond, in the silence after someone provokes you, in the breath you take before deciding whether to send that message, say that sentence, make that move. These small gaps are where strength is forged, because anyone can speak, but it takes depth to be silent with purpose. It also takes courage, because the ego hates silence. It feels like losing, it feels like shrinking, but it isn't. It's refinement. When you walk away with clarity, with dignity, with peace, you've already won. Because no argument is worth losing your presence for. No clash is worth shattering your stillness. That stillness took work. It took sitting with discomfort, unlearning old patterns, facing your shadows. Don't trade it for a moment of being right. There's a story in Zen of a monk who was insulted by a passerby. Instead of responding, he bowed gently and walked away. Later, another monk asked him why he didn't say anything. He replied, "If someone offers you a gift and you don't take it, who does it belong to?" That's the principle, not rejection, but non-participation. Let the energy stay where it started. Let the storm pass without opening your door to it. This kind of strength isn't recognized by the world often. It's quiet, invisible, but it builds something unshakable. You become the person who doesn't panic under pressure, who doesn't lash out when misunderstood, who doesn't crumble when others bring chaos. And slowly, people feel it. They stop expecting you to engage in every fire. They begin to trust your calm more than their own noise. And this training must be lived, not just understood, in real conflicts, in real disappointments, when someone blames you unfairly, when someone speaks with cruelty, when someone attacks your character. That's when the lesson is tested. Can you pause? Can you choose stillness over revenge? Can you protect your energy by walking away, not out of fear, but out of love, for your own sanity, for your long game, for the path you're walking? And when you do this, something else shifts. You begin to see how much suffering is recycled, how much conflict is a pattern, not a necessity. And you stop contributing to it. You break the loop. You interrupt the dance. And that interruption is where healing begins, not just for you, but for everyone watching. Because sometimes your silence teaches more than your words. Sometimes your restraint models a new way to respond. Sometimes your refusal to fight becomes a mirror for others to see their own reaction more clearly. And even if they don't see it, you do. You see who you're becoming, and that is reward enough. Letting go of the need to fight doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become precise. You conserve energy for the battles that truly matter, the ones inside, the fight to stay mindful, to stay kind, to stay steady when the world pulls you off center. And that inner battle is lifelong. It requires everything you've learned up to now: clarity, presence, simplicity, stillness, and now restraint. And this isn't about never defending yourself. It's about choosing when and how to do it from a place of strength, not insecurity. Some fights are sacred. Some truths must be spoken, but you'll know the difference because the voice that speaks from wisdom never rushes, never shouts, never needs to crush the other to stand tall. It simply speaks, and then it returns to stillness. This is the art of strategic retreat, of stepping back to protect what's real, of refusing to lose your peace over someone else's chaos. And in doing so, you build the kind of strength that no insult can shake, the kind of courage that doesn't roar, but endures. And when you've chosen not to fight, when you've stepped back with clarity instead of lunging forward in ego, the space you create doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like freedom. But that freedom, as real as it is, will still be tested, because the world doesn't stop throwing shadows just because you've stopped chasing them. People will still misunderstand you, some will insult, some will lie, and injustice will still happen, no matter how centered you are. This is where the next layer of strength is built, not in how loudly you respond, but in how deeply you remain untouched. Now the mind must learn what few ever do, how to stay unshaken when the world tries to shake you. Buddhist teachings have long emphasized the need for inner protection. Not walls, not emotional armor in the traditional sense, but a kind of mental training that makes the mind resilient without making it hard. A state of presence so refined that even when someone throws their worst words at you, it doesn't stick. Not because you don't care, but because you know where value lives, and it's not in their judgment. This training begins with redefining what it means to be harmed. Most people believe that an insult is harm, that humiliation is damage, that being wronged automatically means losing peace. But Buddhism invites a sharper question. What exactly is being harmed? The body, the reputation, the identity? When you stop identifying with these things, you realize that insult only lands if there's something in you clinging to the image it attacks. If someone calls you a name and you have no attachment to that identity, the word passes through you like wind through trees. But if you cling to who you think you are, strong, smart, respected, then anything that threatens that self-image becomes painful. This is where suffering is born. Not in the words themselves, but in the places they land. And Buddhist practice is about clearing those landing zones. One of the techniques used to train the mind for this is contemplation of the self as empty. This isn't nihilism, it's liberation. If there's no solid, unchanging me to defend, then no insult can pierce anything permanent. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, identities shift with context. And when you start to see the mind this way, as something fluid, not fixed, you stop needing everyone to see you the same way all the time. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you rooted. You don't bend in every windstorm, you stand like a tree whose strength doesn't come from looking unshaken, but from not needing to respond to every breeze. This is not indifference. It's the result of deep seeing, a kind of emotional intelligence that doesn't just feel, it understands, and that understanding becomes your shield. There's also a Buddhist practice called metta bhavana, loving kindness meditation. It's not just about sending goodwill to friends or people you like. It includes sending goodwill to those who've hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because holding hatred keeps the insult alive inside you. The moment you begin offering compassion, even to those who attack you, the sharpness dulls. You stop being the victim of their pain, and you become a witness to it. And in that shift, you gain a superpower. Not because you don't feel pain, but because you stop carrying pain that isn't yours. Someone's words might sting, someone's cruelty might burn, but instead of letting that pain become your identity, you learn to feel it, acknowledge it, and release it. That release is what builds an unshaken mind, a mind that experiences deeply but doesn't cling to experience. Another technique used is mindfulness of reaction. Every time you're criticized, every time someone speaks to you unfairly, the mind reacts. Tightness, anger, the urge to defend, and most people obey that urge. But mindfulness creates a pause. You feel the reaction rise, and instead of acting on it, you name it. There's anger, there's pain, there's the urge to attack back. And in that naming, space opens. The emotion is no longer you, it's just something passing through. This space is everything. Because in that space, you can choose a response that protects your peace instead of your pride. You can say nothing, or you can speak with clarity instead of heat. You can walk away with calm instead of revenge, and each time you do, the mind learns. We don't have to collapse when insulted. We don't have to react when poked. We can stay grounded. Buddhist monastics train this especially when facing criticism or humiliation. Some even seek out these moments, not to be hurt, but to observe the mind's attachment. If you can hear a false accusation and feel your heart race, you've discovered where your clinging lives, and in that awareness, you begin the work of dissolving it, not to become numb, but to become free. Freedom is the real goal here, not control, not perfection. Freedom from the emotional strings others try to pull. Freedom from needing everyone to agree. Freedom from being imprisoned by other people's approval or disapproval. That kind of strength doesn't wear a crown. It wears silence, stillness, a quiet that can't be touched. And even in the face of injustice, real injustice, this training holds. Buddhism doesn't ask you to ignore wrongs. It asks you to meet them with wisdom instead of reaction. There is strength in speaking truth, but it's stronger when it's not fueled by revenge. When your action isn't a tantrum, but a deliberate move rooted in compassion and clarity. Because the truth is, most people who attack others are reacting from their own pain. They're projecting. They're lost in their own distortion. And when you understand that, you stop taking things so personally. You stop confusing someone else's suffering for your identity. And in that separation, you find peace. That peace becomes your home, your anchor. And when it's stable enough, the world can scream, and you can whisper back, "I don't need to absorb this." That's not denial, that's discernment. Knowing what to hold and what to release. Knowing which words matter and which ones are just echoes of someone else's storm. This also transforms how you talk to yourself, because the worst insults often come from within: the shame, the regret, the inner critic. And all the techniques you use to face outer attacks apply here too. You observe, you breathe, you notice the story, and you don't feed it. You return to presence, to what's real, to what's happening now, not what happened years ago, not what could have been, not what others think. Just now. And in this now, there's nothing to defend, nothing to prove. Just breath, just awareness, just the quiet knowing. I am not what they say. I am not what I fear. I am not the roles I play. You are presence, consciousness, the space in which all of this happens, but not the content itself. This isn't an idea, it's a lived experience, and the more you return to it, the stronger you become. Not by building walls, but by realizing you don't need them, because the things that used to pierce you don't land anymore. There's nowhere for them to stick. That's the unshaken mind. Not immune to pain, but no longer run by it. Not afraid of conflict, but no longer owned by it. Not desperate for peace, but radiating it from within. That's the kind of strength you carry quietly. The kind that can sit in a room full of chaos and remain untouched. Not because you're special, but because you've trained, and the training never ends. But every moment of awareness adds a layer of protection. Not a wall, but a space, a clarity, a confidence that says, I know who I am, I know what I value, and no insult, no injustice, no moment of humiliation will take that away. This is not arrogance. It's alignment with what's true, with what's eternal, with the part of you that cannot be broken by words or warped by opinion. That's what you're building. And once the mind has been trained to remain unshaken, once insult, injustice, and humiliation lose their grip, there's something underneath that strength still waiting to be uncovered, a depth that goes beyond calm, beyond stillness, something radiant, not fragile like glass, not heavy like stone, but piercing, luminous, and unbreakable. In the teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism, this is the diamond mind, a state of awareness so clear it reflects all without distortion, so strong it cannot be shattered, and so sharp it cuts through illusion like light through darkness. What you're about to enter now is a different dimension of practice, not just mental discipline, but energetic transformation. In Vajrayana, or Tibetan Buddhism, the diamond is not just a metaphor. It's a symbol of the indestructible nature of awakened mind. Called Vajra in Sanskrit, it represents clarity that doesn't blur, power that doesn't dominate, and presence that doesn't fade. The diamond mind is not built through logic or argument. It is forged through experience, through visualization, mantra, and tantric techniques designed to activate the deepest layers of consciousness. This path begins where most others stop, not with silence, but with sound, not with stillness alone, but with form and energy combined. Visualization practices in Vajrayana are not fantasy. They are sacred tools for reshaping the mind's inner landscape. You are not imagining for escape. You are invoking for transformation. Visualizing a deity is not about worship. It's about mirroring. Every quality you see in the deity, compassion, fearlessness, wisdom, is already within you. The practice is meant to awaken it. When a practitioner visualizes themselves as a bodhisattva or a wrathful deity, they are not pretending. They are training the nervous system to hold that energy, to become it. The symbols used, lotuses, flames, weapons, halos, are not decoration. They are precise tools for activating specific qualities in the mind. Every petal means something. Every color, every gesture, every sound has a purpose. They're like keys, unlocking doors most people never knew existed. And mantras, those ancient syllables repeated over and over, are not magic spells. They are vibrational anchors. Their repetition isn't about belief, it's about resonance. The sound of a mantra begins to shape the rhythms of the mind. It pulls thought patterns into alignment. It interrupts noise and installs clarity. Reciting a mantra isn't about escape. It's about return. Return to the deepest part of you that already knows how to stand in fire without burning. The diamond mind is not achieved by avoiding suffering. It's achieved by walking straight into it, with tools that protect you not by shielding you, but by transforming the way you relate to pain. Visualization does this by changing what the mind sees when difficulty arises. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim, as small, as overwhelmed, you see yourself as expansive, illuminated, empowered. You see the qualities of awakened mind already present. And through that seeing, you begin to live differently. In Vajrayana, even wrath has a place. Fierce deities with flaming hair and wild eyes are not images of rage. They are symbols of fierce compassion, the kind of power that cuts through delusion, not to destroy, but to liberate. When you face fear or ego with that energy inside you, you stop negotiating with doubt. You burn through it, not with violence, with clarity, with presence, with an unshakable connection to what cannot be broken. This practice is not casual. It requires preparation, a steady foundation of ethics, mindfulness, and discipline. Vajrayana does not skip the groundwork. It builds on it. And once that foundation is strong, the symbolic techniques deepen what's already there. They don't replace the basics. They unlock their full potential. The diamond mind is also trained in the body, not through tension, but through subtle awareness. Vajrayana includes practices like inner fire meditation, working with subtle energy channels in the body to generate clarity and warmth. The breath is visualized as light, the body as transparent. Emotions are met not just as sensations, but as flowing energy that can be redirected, not suppressed. You don't kill anger. You transform it into precision. You don't numb desire. You refine it into devotion. This is alchemy, not rejection, but transformation. And the strength that arises from this isn't loud. It's stable. When someone tries to shame you, the diamond mind sees the truth behind the words. When a situation turns chaotic, the diamond mind doesn't panic. It shines. When old fears surface, they are met not with collapse, but with presence that cuts through illusion, like a blade, like a beam, like a diamond catching light. This is also where duality begins to dissolve. In Vajrayana, the ordinary and the sacred are not separate. Your body is not an obstacle. It's a vehicle. Your breath is not mundane. It's a bridge. Your life, even in its messiest moments, is not a distraction from the path. It is the path. The mind doesn't have to become perfect to be indestructible. It just has to stop identifying with its distortions and start training its gaze on truth. Truth in this tradition is not just awareness of impermanence. It's direct realization of your own nature. The part of you that is not born and does not die, not as belief, but as felt experience. Vajrayana uses every tool available, sound, image, movement, imagination, to wake you up to that nature. And once it's seen, it cannot be unseen. That's what indestructibility means. Not that you won't feel pain, but that your core clarity will not break under it. Even death is viewed differently. In Vajrayana, teachings on the bardo, the transitional state after death, the same techniques are used. Visualization and mantra help the practitioner stay awake during the most disorienting transitions. The diamond mind, trained in life, remains clear even when the body dissolves. Fear may arise, but it doesn't control. Confusion may appear, but it doesn't stick, because the awareness has been trained to remain lucid, to recognize illusion and return to essence. This kind of mental power isn't exclusive. It's available, but it requires commitment. Vajrayana doesn't promise comfort. It promises awakening. And awakening, in this path, means stripping away everything that isn't your true nature, until what's left is indestructible, not because it's armored, but because it's real. And even if you don't formally walk the Vajrayana path, its symbols can still teach. Ask yourself, what if your mind was clear like crystal, sharp like a blade, luminous like flame? How would you speak? How would you walk into your next challenge? How would you carry your pain, your joy, your silence? That is the diamond practice. Taking the symbolic and making it personal. Taking what is ancient and making it alive now. You don't need robes or rituals to start. You need focus. You need presence. You need the willingness to train, not just to cope, but to evolve. Not just to calm the mind, but to strengthen it. Not just to survive the world, but to meet it with clarity so radiant it cannot be dimmed. This is the strength of Vajrayana, not in force, not in distance, but in presence so whole, so awake, so unshakably luminous, that illusion has nowhere left to hide. And once the diamond mind is uncovered, once clarity becomes indestructible, once presence cuts through illusion, another truth begins to unfold, quieter than all the rest. It's the truth that nothing outside of you can measure the strength inside of you. No title, no possession, no praise. Because the deepest transformation doesn't happen when the world applauds. It happens in silence, in solitude, in the kind of struggle no one sees, the kind of growth that leaves no trophy behind, only awareness. This is the path most never talk about, the path of the inner pilgrimage. The outer world is loud with goals, careers to chase, status to gain, recognition to seek. But Buddhism shifts the direction of the journey. Progress is not about getting somewhere else. It's about going deeper into where you already are. It's about facing yourself, not as you want to be seen, but as you truly are, without filters, without stories. And in that seeing, building a presence that can hold anything without breaking. The inner pilgrimage isn't made of travel. It's made of stillness. Each step is an insight. Each challenge, a mirror. Each discomfort, a doorway. What looks like stillness on the outside is a storm of transformation inside. It's the moment you choose honesty over avoidance, silence over argument, reflection over reaction, and no one may notice, but you will, and that's where strength begins. In this kind of journey, milestones are invisible. There are no certificates for overcoming your own fear, no applause for forgiving someone who will never say sorry, no spotlight for sitting through a wave of sadness without needing to escape. But each of these moments is a step, and each step shapes a mind that no longer depends on validation to feel worthy. The Buddha himself walked a literal path, but the awakening didn't come from the miles. It came from the surrender, from the deep confrontation with suffering, illusion, impermanence. His journey outward led inward, and every teaching since points us in the same direction. Stop chasing the world, start facing your own mind. Because the truth is, most pain doesn't come from what's happening. It comes from how the mind relates to what's happening. The inner pilgrimage is the process of changing that relationship, learning to meet pain with compassion instead of resistance, to meet joy without clinging, to meet confusion with curiosity instead of fear. This journey requires no permission, no perfect conditions. You don't need to be in a temple. You don't need a teacher watching. It happens when you wake up and face the thoughts you don't want to think. When you sit quietly instead of distracting yourself. When you look honestly at your habits, your reactions, your cravings, and instead of judging, you stay. You watch. You learn. And that learning is real progress, because each insight, each small shift in perception, builds a mind that is less shaken by the outside world. You don't get there in a straight line. You circle back. You revisit old patterns with new eyes. You fall down and get up, not because someone told you to, but because you've seen that standing is its own reward. Even your darkest moments become steps on this path, times when everything fell apart, when you were forced to let go, when silence was all that was left. These moments don't set you back. They deepen you. They crack the surface and expose something truer underneath. Pain becomes teacher. Loss becomes mirror. Confusion becomes fuel. The inner pilgrimage teaches you that strength isn't about getting through life untouched. It's about letting life touch you deeply without losing who you are. It's about staying present even when it hurts, even when nothing makes sense, especially then, because that's when transformation happens, not in the comfort, but in the surrender. And as you walk this path, something unexpected starts to happen. The things that used to define you begin to fade. The roles, the labels, the expectations. You don't need them as much. You start measuring progress in terms of peace, not performance. In terms of self-honesty, not self-image. In terms of how gently you can meet the parts of yourself you used to reject. This doesn't mean you stop achieving. It means achievement no longer defines your worth. You can succeed without needing success to fill a hole. You can contribute without losing yourself in the outcome. You can serve without making it about being seen. That shift doesn't make your life smaller. It makes your presence larger. Because you're no longer fractured between who you are and who you're pretending to be. The inner pilgrimage also transforms how you relate to others. You stop needing them to act a certain way for you to feel okay. You stop projecting your wounds onto their behavior. You stop expecting people to complete what only your own awareness can hold. Relationships become cleaner, softer, built not on need, but on presence. And when challenges come, and they always will, the mind you've trained through inner journeying won't collapse. It won't panic. It will watch, respond, hold steady. Not because it's above emotion, but because it's practiced staying with emotion without being consumed. That practice becomes your foundation, a kind of groundedness no one can take. Even your inner critic starts to lose its power, not because it disappears, but because you stop believing it. You hear the old voices, but you recognize them as echoes, not truth. You don't fight them. You let them pass. You return to now, again and again, and that returning becomes your strength. This journey also strips away comparison, because when your progress is measured inwardly, you stop comparing your life to others. You stop measuring your timeline against someone else's. You stop needing to match their pace or mirror their path. Your growth becomes intimate, private, sacred, and that makes it real. The inner pilgrimage is also about remembering, not becoming something new, but returning to what was never broken. The part of you that has always known silence, always known stillness, always known how to breathe in the middle of chaos and still feel whole. That part was never lost, only buried, and each step of the inner path uncovers it. And over time, a shift occurs. You stop running toward the next thing. You stop trying to fix every uncomfortable emotion. You stop needing the world to reflect your progress. You become content with the quiet victories, the moment you didn't react, the moment you forgave, the moment you sat in silence instead of scrolling, the moment you caught your breath and chose presence over panic. And this journey never ends. It deepens. With each layer you peel back, another truth waits, another habit softens, another fear reveals itself not as enemy, but as doorway. You walk not to arrive, but to awaken, to meet yourself not just once, but in every moment, fully, clearly, gently. The world may never see how far you've come. There may be no map, no reward, no final destination. But you'll know. You'll feel it in how you breathe, how you listen, how you hold space. For yourself, for others, for the entire mess and beauty of life. And that knowing, that's enough. And after walking the inner path, after shedding the need to prove, to perform, to chase approval, the weight begins to lift. The world still spins, but your steps feel steadier. There's no pressure to arrive, just presence in the walking. But even here, even in this space of stillness, a different kind of shadow waits. It doesn't scream or demand. It whispers, it compares, it turns heads toward others and quietly asks, "Why not me?" This is the subtle grip of measurement, and breaking free from it isn't just about silence, it's about strength. Strength that doesn't rise by climbing over others, but by celebrating them. This is where the practice of mudita begins. Joy that isn't yours, but frees you anyway. In Buddhism, mudita is called sympathetic joy, the ability to feel genuine happiness for someone else's success, beauty, peace, or growth, not as a performance, not as politeness, as truth. This joy is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It smiles inwardly, and in that smile, something radical happens. The engine of comparison starts to shut down. Most minds are conditioned to measure. How much am I doing compared to them? How far have I come? What do I lack that they have? These questions may not be spoken out loud, but they shape the nervous system. They plant dissatisfaction, even in moments of abundance. Comparison tightens the breath. It blinds the eyes. You could have everything you once prayed for and still feel behind if your gaze is always tilted toward someone else. But mudita flips that script. It trains the mind to find joy in the success of others, not because you get something from it, not because it's expected, but because joy is expansive, because celebrating someone else doesn't take away from you, it actually gives back. Every moment of jealousy contracts the heart. Every moment of sympathetic joy opens it. This doesn't mean you pretend. You don't force joy when there's pain. You don't deny your feelings. You include them. But you also investigate them. You ask, why does this person's light dim mine? Why does their joy feel like a threat? And when you sit with that honestly, you see that it never was about them. It was about the internal belief that worth is limited, that success is a race, that love is a spotlight only one person can stand in at a time. But Buddhist practice teaches something different. That value isn't based on ranking, that peace isn't built through competition, that the more you can celebrate others, the more free you become. Because the deeper truth is this: someone else's beauty doesn't erase your own. Someone else's growth doesn't slow yours. Life is not a ladder, it's a field, and there's room to bloom in all directions. The mind might resist this at first. It will say, if they win, I lose. If they're praised, I'm forgotten. These thoughts are habits, not facts, and they come from a scarcity mindset, a belief that love, worth, success are resources that run out. But they don't. The more you give, the more you expand. The more you celebrate, the more you soften. Practicing mudita begins with awareness. You notice the spark of jealousy. You don't judge it, you sit with it, and then you breathe into it. You ask, can I soften here? Can I feel happy for them, even a little? Even if part of me still aches? That honesty is the doorway, because the point is not perfection, it's transformation. And when you practice mudita consistently, something else happens. You stop keeping score. You stop counting likes, comparing milestones, measuring timelines. Your worth detaches from numbers, from roles, from expectations. It roots into presence, into action, into who you are when no one's watching. This is how quiet confidence is built, not the kind that needs applause, the kind that sits in a room full of successful people and feels no need to shrink or compete, the kind that says, I'm glad for you, and means it. Because your peace isn't threatened by someone else's light. In fact, their light helps you see more clearly. This shift also changes relationships. When you stop comparing, you start connecting. You listen better. You speak with less performance. You love without trying to outshine. And in that simplicity, people feel safer. Walls drop. Egos soften. Conversations deepen. Because the energy of measurement has left the room. And this practice doesn't just apply to peers, it applies to everyone. The person who seems ahead, the one who got what you wanted, even the stranger living the life you dream of. When mudita is alive, their joy becomes a reminder, not a threat, a reflection of what's possible, not a mirror of your lack. This doesn't mean you stop striving. It means you strive from wholeness. You still work, still grow, still pursue your vision, but not to catch up, not to prove. You move because it's your path, not because someone else has made you feel behind. That change in motive is subtle, but it transforms the experience of progress. You start waking up with less tension. You stop questioning your pace. You begin to trust that your story has its own rhythm, that your timing doesn't have to match theirs, that you can move slow and still arrive, that you can celebrate someone's leap while taking your own quiet step. And this shift also builds protection, because the world will keep feeding comparison, social media, gossip, competition. But when you've trained in mudita, those triggers don't stick the same way. You scroll, and instead of tension, you feel joy. You hear someone's good news, and your heart opens instead of tightens. That's not weakness. That's power. The kind of power that doesn't need to be loud to be real. And over time, this joy for others starts to reflect inward. You stop comparing yourself to old versions of you. You stop punishing yourself for not being further along. You begin to trust the unfolding. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You stop needing to borrow someone else's journey to validate your own. This is the fruit of mudita. Not just kindness, not just love, freedom from envy, from insecurity, from the endless itch of not enough. You don't have to keep proving anything. You just keep showing up with presence, with peace, with a heart that stays open even when the world tempts it to close. And when setbacks happen, as they always do, the mind trained in mudita recovers faster, because it's not tied to ranking. It doesn't see failure as falling behind. It sees it as part of the path, part of the unfolding, and it rests there, without shame, without urgency, just awareness, just breath. This kind of mind cannot be manipulated. It doesn't chase false status. It doesn't collapse under criticism. It stands, not on a pedestal, but on groundedness, on the deep knowing that value is not a trophy. It's your ability to live in alignment with truth, with care, with presence. So when others shine, let them. When others win, cheer for them. When others grow, grow with them. Not as competition, as companions. There is no race. There is only the unfolding, the breath, the next kind word, the next honest step. That's where strength lives now. You've just walked through the quiet storm of the self. You've stood in the fire of craving without reaching. You've watched the rope turn back into a rope. You've felt the cold surge of non-reactivity, stood unmoved like a mountain, and tasted the sharp edge of the diamond mind. You've stepped off the map and into the silence where real strength grows, not from applause, not from comparison, not from control, but from presence. This wasn't a lesson in pretending to be calm. It was a journey through the cracks, the shadows, the forgotten corners of your own mind. You've learned that gentleness is not weakness, it's resilience without sharp edges. That surrender isn't giving up, it's giving space. That simplicity isn't less, it's power refined. That silence doesn't mean absence, it means control that doesn't shout. That strength isn't something to show, it's something you become. Now the noise of the world may return, the chaos, the pressure, the comparisons. But something inside you has changed. You'll feel it when someone tests your patience and you breathe instead of break. You'll feel it when jealousy knocks and you open the door with joy. You'll feel it when things fall apart and you remain seated in the middle of it all, grounded, still, present. That is inner strength. Not built in the gym, not built in the spotlight, built in the unseen hours, built in stillness, built in surrender, built in the way you choose to meet this very moment and the next. If this journey moved something in you, if a single insight landed and stayed, leave a comment and let us know which moment hit the deepest. Your words might help someone else wake up too. And if you want to keep building this kind of strength, real, quiet, unshakable strength, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. There's more waiting, and we'll walk it together. Sleep well, grow strong, and stay soft where it counts.